Hey guys, tonight we're diving straight into one of history's most haunting questions. Why Germany lost the First World War. Yeah, the one that was supposed to be over by Christmas, but instead chewed through a generation and left the world permanently scarred. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this one, at least not with your optimism intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in Berlin in the summer of 1913, when everything still feels like it might last forever. The streets hum with electric trams, women in feathered hats stroll past cafes, where men in bowler hats argue about art and empire. Germany, the Kaiserreich, isn't just a country, it's a phenomenon. Barely unified for 50 years, yet already outpacing ancient empires in industry, science and swagger. You can almost feel the hum of machines from Krupp's factories vibrating through the cobblestones, as if the whole nation's heartbeat is powered by steel. The Kaiser, Wilhelm II, is a man obsessed with image. You watch him review his troops, that immaculate moustache bristling as he waves to the crowds, all pomp and theatrical confidence. But behind the gestures you sense insecurity, the kind that comes from inheriting a world built by others. He wants Germany not just respected, but feared. Britain has its empire, France has its culture, Russia its sheer immensity, and Wilhelm wants something grander, a place in the sun. You can trace the roots of that hunger back to Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, the architect of unity. But Bismarck, the master of cautious alliances, warned against what was coming. "Don't let the map of Europe catch fire," he said in so many words. Wilhelm naturally ignored him and dismissed him in 1890. It's like watching a driver throw away the manual just as the car starts speeding downhill. In the glow of industrial success, Germany starts flexing its muscles. New battleships roll out of the docks at Wilhelmshaven, sleek grey beasts designed to rival Britain's Royal Navy. You can almost smell the hot tar and iron as welders finish another dreadnought, a floating symbol of ambition and anxiety. Because make no mistake, Britain notices, the great naval race begins, and it's a race Germany can't win but refuses to stop running. And yet, the mood at home is electric. Universities churn out engineers and chemists who seem to rewrite the rules of progress. You'd find yourself in smoky Berlin cafes overhearing talk of new dyes, new medicines, new weapons. There's a confidence bordering on arrogance, that technology, discipline and planning can overcome anything. It's a national faith, a kind of secular religion. Progress as prophecy. Still, beneath the optimism, something uneasy stirs. The working class is restless. The Social Democratic Party, once banned, is now the largest in the Reichstag. You catch snatches of conversation between factory workers. Long hours, low pay, little voice. The Kaiser's empire looks monolithic, but the social foundation already trembles. Out in the countryside, farmers feel left behind by the urban boom. They grumble about taxes, about Prussian elites, about the way cities seem to eat everything. You can almost taste the divide forming, modernity's sharp edge cutting into old Europe's fabric. And then there's the military. The general staff, the real brains of the empire, exists in a world of its own. Men like Schlieffen, Moltke and Ludendorff think in maps and timetables, not politics or pity. They build plans like machines, precise, elegant, and, as it turns out, terrifyingly brittle. You'd hear them speak of decisive battle and total war, long before anyone realised what those phrases truly meant. Here's a historical fact. In 1913, Germany spent about £94 million on its army and navy, more than double its pre-1900 level. The empire was literally arming itself into exhaustion before the shooting even began. And a quirky fact, Wilhelm II loved dressing in other nations' military uniforms. There are photos of him grinning in a British admiral's outfit, medals glittering, as if he's trying to cosplay his way into an empire. The British found it both flattering and unnerving, the open debate among historians. Whether Germany's march toward war was deliberate or accidental. Was it an inevitable clash of empires, or a catastrophic failure of diplomacy and ego? Some say Wilhelm's insecurities drove everything. Others argue it was the logic of alliances, a domino setup that no one could stop once tipped. You might find yourself leaning one way, then the other, as you watch Europe's powder keg fill grain by grain. By late 1913, Europe is like a ballroom crammed with explosives and only one way out. Someone, somewhere, is going to strike a match. You walk past Berlin's Brandenburg Gate one frosty evening, the gaslights shimmering off the wet cobblestones, and feel it, that tension, that sense that the whole continent is holding its breath. And if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the ticking of history, steady as a clock. Every train leaving the station, every speech made in some marble hall, every alliance signed in a hurry, it's all part of the countdown. Germany, dazzling and defiant, stands at the peak of its power. But peaks are precarious things. From here, there's only one way left to go. You wake up to the scent of cigar smoke and polished oak, and you're not in Berlin anymore. You're drifting through the back rooms of European diplomacy, circa 1914. The air is heavy with the perfume of empire and paranoia. Everyone's talking about alliances, those polite promises scribbled on paper that supposedly guarantee peace, but, as you're about to see, guarantee the opposite. Picture the map. Germany sits smack in the centre of Europe, surrounded like a wolf in a ring of nervous deer. To the west, France still seethes over losing Alsace-Lorraine back in 1871, a humiliation carved into stone. To the east, Russia looms with endless land and endless men. Britain, the naval queen, watches from her island, wary of anyone building ships too fast. And down south, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Germany's aging dance partner, teeters between grandeur and senility, one ethnic quarrel away from collapse. You find yourself floating into a candlelit room in Vienna, 1879. Here's the start of Germany's so-called insurance policy, the dual alliance with Austria-Hungary. The deal's simple. If Russia attacks one, the other helps. But if France gets feisty, Austria can stay home. It's the diplomatic equivalent of a prenup written by paranoid generals. A few years later, Italy joins in, making it a triple alliance. Italy's promise? Stand by Germany and Austria. The fine print? Only if it's convenient. Spoiler, it won't be. Meanwhile, Bismarck, yes, the Iron Chancellor again, is busy spinning webs elsewhere. He pulls Russia into a reinsurance treaty, a clever little backdoor that keeps the Tsar friendly. He also flirts diplomatically with Britain, balancing everyone just enough so no one dares make the first move. You can almost see him smirking behind that walrus moustache, running Europe like a clock. Then Wilhelm II fires him. When the Kaiser tosses Bismarck aside in 1890, you can hear the gears grind. Germany lets the reinsurance treaty expire, and Russia, feeling jilted, wanders into France's arms. By 1894, you've got the Franco-Russian alliance, the diplomatic equivalent of two exes teaming up against a mutual rival. And it works. France gains the muscle it needs, Russia gains the money it lacks, and Germany, supposedly the master strategist, starts realizing it's boxed itself in. That's the moment the trap starts closing. Here's the hard historical fact. By the turn of the century, Europe's two main alliance blocks were fixed. The Triple Alliance on one side, the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and eventually Britain, on the other. A six-nation seesaw balanced only by fear. Any spark could set it swinging violently. The quirky fact: despite the looming danger, European royalty were all cousins. The Kaiser, Tsar Nicholas II, and King George V shared the same grandmother, Queen Victoria. They sent each other letters signed Nicky and Willie, like awkward pen pals who couldn't stop arming against each other. Family reunions must have been tense. You drift next into a smoke-thick embassy party in London, 1904. The British have just signed an entente cordiale with France, a fancy way of saying, we won't fight over Africa anymore. 2 years later, they patch things up with Russia too. Now the island empire that once avoided continental commitments is slowly tying itself into Europe's fate. Meanwhile, Germany keeps building dreadnoughts. You can hear the steel clatter and the hammers echo from Kiel to Portsmouth. Britain's newspapers scream about the German menace. The Royal Navy responds by launching even bigger ships. Suddenly, the race that was supposed to secure peace makes everyone seasick with anxiety. You hover over Berlin's war offices, where General Alfred von Schlieffen is sketching his masterpiece. His idea: if Germany's stuck between Russia and France, it must knock out France fast before Russia finishes mobilizing. How? By sweeping through neutral Belgium like a door hinge. It's elegant, mathematical, and morally questionable. We'll violate Belgium, Schlieffen murmurs, but only a little. That's like saying you'll steal just one cookie from the jar. The plan's flaw isn't geometry, it's humanity. And here's where the scholarly debate still rages. Did the alliances make war inevitable, or did human choice still matter? One camp argues the system was self-destructive, a domino chain waiting for a push. The other says individuals, Wilhelm, the Tsar, the foreign ministers, had agency, that they stumbled through July 1914 blinded by pride and miscommunication. Maybe it's both, an iron web of obligations held by men too proud to cut it. You follow that web into the Balkans, where the Austro-Hungarian Empire keeps poking at Serbia, trying to prove it's still relevant. It's like watching an old lion pick a fight with a young scrappy one. In 1908, Austria annexes Bosnia and Herzegovina, making Serbia furious and dragging Russia's Slavic pride into the argument. Germany backs Austria to the hilt, promising support no matter what. The blank cheque has been written, no expiration date. By 1914, Europe is one assassination away from implosion, and when Archduke Franz Ferdinand takes that fateful car ride through Sarajevo, you can almost feel the tension snap. The bullet that hits him doesn't just kill a man, it detonates the entire system. Austria demands impossible concessions from Serbia, Russia mobilises to defend its ally, Germany mobilises to defend Austria, France mobilises to defend Russia. Britain watches, hesitating, like someone staring at a fire creeping toward their fence. 1 month after the gunfire in Sarajevo, you can trace the letters on the map. Mobilization. Trains are rolling, telegrams are flashing, and the alliances designed to prevent catastrophe have now guaranteed it. Germany, confident and terrified at once, prepares to fight the world. And you're standing on the edge of August 1914 listening to the drumbeat of destiny getting louder. The alliances have done their work. Europe's kings and kaisers have built the stage. All that's missing now is the curtain rising. You can almost feel the vibration of the rails under your boots. It's August 1914, and Germany is on the move. The air smells of coal smoke, oil, and adrenaline. The posters on Berlin's walls shout, "Gott strafe England," "May God punish England," and crowds cheer as trains rattle out of the stations, packed with soldiers who think they'll be home by Christmas. You know better, of course, but try not to ruin their optimism just yet. Everywhere you look, there's motion. Boots stomping in rhythm, bugles cutting through the morning fog, and flags snapping like whips. The Schlieffen Plan is in motion, and it's the most ambitious military timetable ever built. An entire nation running on rails and minutes. You stand near a station master shouting orders as locomotives scream through the platforms, hauling endless wagons filled with men, guns, and horses. Each car has chalk scribbles on the side, "Paris in 6 weeks." The soldiers sing as they go, their new grey uniforms blending with the smoke. Someone waves from the window holding a postcard of the Eiffel Tower. You almost want to tell him he'll never see it. The Schlieffen Plan, Germany's masterpiece of arrogance, is simple on paper. Swing the right arm of the army through Belgium, smash France from behind, and then spin east to crush Russia before it finishes mobilising. It's clockwork conquest, but you can already feel how tight the gears are wound. The first tremor comes when Germany invades Belgium on August 4th. You hear the clatter of hooves and boots crossing the border before dawn, and then the gunfire begins. Belgium's resistance, expected to last 2 days, holds for nearly 3 weeks. King Albert's little army refuses to collapse, and British troops rush in to help. The timetable starts to slip. Here's your first hard historical fact. Germany's schedule demanded they reach Paris in 39 days. By day 20, they were already 5 behind. That's not just a delay, it's doom disguised as bureaucracy. You ride along with a German column moving through the Belgian countryside, and the countryside looks like something out of a grim fairy tale. Towns burn, church bells hang twisted, and civilians flee with carts full of whatever they could grab. German soldiers, frustrated by sniper fire, real or imagined, lash out brutally. In places like Louvain and Dinant, hundreds of civilians are executed. You feel the horror of it, how fear becomes fury and fury becomes policy. The world notices. Newspapers in Britain and America print stories of the rape of Belgium. The phrase sticks. Germany's image, once that of an efficient modern nation, morphs overnight into that of a barbaric aggressor. You can feel the propaganda storm brewing, and for once it's not far from truth. Meanwhile, to the south, the French army charges into Alsace and Lorraine under its own dream, Plan 17. Red pants, shining bayonets, and a confidence so misplaced it borders on tragicomedy. The French believe in Elan, the mystical spirit of the attack. You watch lines of men charge into machine gun fire as if passion alone could stop bullets. Spoiler, it can't. The losses are biblical. Back in Germany, the mood is still euphoric. Newspapers print victory maps in advance. School children collect war donations. Berlin's cafes buzz with gossip about a quick peace. Even Kaiser Wilhelm declares, "You will be home before the leaves fall." You can almost laugh at how fast optimism multiplies when no one's counted the dead yet. And yet, in those early days, you glimpse real triumphs. At the Battle of Tannenberg in East Prussia, 2 German generals, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, annihilate a Russian army twice their size. 90,000 prisoners, a nation rejoicing. The Eastern Front feels like redemption, proof that German genius still reigns. But you notice something others don't. Every victory pulls men and supplies away from the West, where the real war will be decided. Here's your quirky fact. Some German towns rename themselves after Tannenberg in celebration. One even erected a massive wooden arch covered in pine branches that read, "The East saved the West." Poetic, sure, but tragically premature. The open scholarly debate, whether the Schlieffen Plan was doomed from the start or simply sabotaged by indecision. Some historians say Helmuth von Moltke the Younger, the man who inherited it, weakened the plan by pulling troops to the east too early. Others argue it never could have worked anyway. The logistics were fantasy, the distances too great, and human endurance too fragile. You feel it yourself when you march alongside the exhausted men crossing northern France. Their boots crack in the dust, their faces hollowed by sleeplessness. The horses die faster than they can be replaced. The supply lines stretch thinner than the promises. You smell rot, gunpowder and fear. And then, September 1914, the miracle of the Marne. Paris, nearly encircled, seems doomed. But the French rally, literally using taxicabs to ferry troops to the front. You can picture it. Red-faced drivers cursing under their breath as soldiers pile in. Rifles clattering. The Eiffel Tower fading in the rearview mirror. The taxis of Paris save the city. The German advance halts. The plan collapses. And when the retreat begins, you can feel something ancient breaking. The illusion that wars can be planned like train schedules. The soldiers dig in. The first trenches are shallow, temporary, meant for a night or two, but the rain falls, and the artillery shells keep coming, and the trenches deepen, stretch, multiply. Soon they'll carve a scar from the North Sea to Switzerland, a scar that will take 4 years to close. You walk that muddy line one night, the lantern light flickering over sandbags and faces smeared with grime. Somewhere, a gramophone plays a soft waltz, absurd against the thunder in the distance. You realise the war has already changed shape. No longer a sprint, but a crawl. No longer glory, but survival. Germany has marched into the future it dreamed of and finds it looks like hell. The year is 1915, and you're ankle-deep in a trench that smells like wet chalk and sweat and old soup. The Western Front has stopped moving, an entire war frozen in mud. You can trace the line on a map from the North Sea down to the Swiss border, and it feels less like geography than anatomy, a wound that never heals. This is where Germany's dream of swift victory finally chokes on barbed wire. It starts in Flanders. You hear the pop of rifle fire like rain on tin, the dull whump of artillery that never quite stops. The sky hangs low and grey, sagging with smoke and rain. Rats scurry over boots and bread alike. When night falls, flares arc upward, washing the world in brief, colourless daylight. You flinch even though you know what's coming. More shelling, more screams, more nothing gained. You move along the line and past the letters Achtung, Feind hört mit, painted on wood. Beware, the enemy is listening, as if any soldier here has the energy left to whisper secrets. The men talk in half-jokes and curses. They name their lice. They dream of beer that isn't muddy. Some scribble letters home that will never be mailed because the postcard got blown to dust yesterday. Germany's high command still insists there's a plan. They tell the troops to dig deeper, hold tighter, and soon they'll push through. But the Schlieffen clock has stopped. Every push forward means hundreds of men gone, a few yards gained, and then the inevitable counterattack. You can feel morale curdle like old milk. Here's your historical fact. By the end of 1914, after just 5 months of fighting, Germany had already lost more than 800,000 men, dead, wounded, or missing. The army that marched to Paris in neat lines now huddles in holes, and yet the machinery keeps grinding. Generals on both sides try to out-invent the stalemate. The British bring tanks, the French refine artillery, and Germany, ever the chemist, experiments with poison. You're there at Ypres in April 1915, standing with a line of German troops as canisters hiss open. A strange green fog creeps across no man's land, heavy and silent. You smell bleach, garlic, and death. Within minutes, French and colonial troops on the other side are clawing at their throats, choking on chlorine. It's horror turned scientific, and for a moment it works. The line breaks wide open, but no one knows how to follow through. The Germans hesitate, afraid of their own cloud, and the chance evaporates. It's one of the war's great ironies. The invention that should have guaranteed victory instead invents a new kind of stalemate, one painted in gas masks and misery. Quirky fact time. Early gas masks were so unreliable that soldiers improvised by soaking handkerchiefs in urine and tying them over their faces. Not exactly the glorious future industrial science had promised. You climb up out of the trench one grey morning and see the new landscape the war has sculpted. Villages are just chimneys, forests are splinters, the earth looks boiled, even the birds have stopped singing. Somewhere a German sergeant jokes, "When the war's over, the farmers will plough up helmets instead of potatoes." He's not wrong. Far behind the lines, Berlin tries to pretend life goes on. Cafes still serve coffee, ersatz coffee made from roasted barley, and the newspapers still promise victory soon. Posters show smiling soldiers under sunny skies. The disconnect between picture and mud is dizzying. Meanwhile, in Britain and France, the stories of Belgium's suffering are retold again and again. Germany's invasion has made it the villain of the century, and public opinion hardens. Volunteers flood Allied recruitment offices. You can almost feel the moral weight shifting, the world deciding that Germany must be stopped not just for power, but for principle. And somewhere in the midst of all this, a debate quietly starts to flicker among historians even a century later. Was trench warfare inevitable once machine guns met modern industry, or could the generals have thought their way around it? Some say it was technology's fault, the firepower too new, the doctrines too old. Others insist it was imagination that failed first. Maybe both. You wander past a line of soldiers waiting for rations. One of them hums a tune, something slow and melancholy. Another carves initials into a rifle stock. The rain keeps falling, filling shell holes that reflect the grey sky like mirrors. You catch your reflection in one and realise how easily faces blend here. French, German, British. Mud making everyone the same shade of lost. By Christmas the guns sputter into a rare silence. You hear voices, first German then English, calling softly across no man's land. Someone shouts, "Don't shoot!" Another tosses a cigarette. Within an hour, men from both sides are meeting in the cratered middle, trading chocolate and songs. For a few hours the war pauses itself. It's fragile, almost holy. You listen as they sing Stille Nacht and Silent Night, the harmonies weaving through the cold air. Someone pulls out a soccer ball. They play until a flare goes up from a nervous officer and the moment breaks. Everyone scrambles back to their trenches, pretending it never happened. You linger there, hearing the laughter fade, the shells resume, and you realise something. The front isn't just a place. It's a state of mind. Once you've seen it, you carry it forever. The Western Front, the so-called wall of flesh, is now immovable. Germany, trapped behind its own barbed wire, doesn't know it yet, but the seeds of defeat are already sown. Not in one battle, not in one mistake, but in the slow, grinding arithmetic of men and mud and time. You turn east, leaving behind the mud and the metallic stench of the Western Front, and for a moment the air feels cleaner, until you realise it only smells different because this is Russia's air. Colder, sharper, more uncertain. You've traded barbed wire for birch trees and endless whispering plains. It's 1914 still, late summer, and Germany is about to make its name echo across the eastern horizon. You find yourself on a train with General Paul von Hindenburg, summoned from retirement and chewing his moustache like it owes him money. Next to him sits his brilliant, slightly manic aide, Erich Ludendorff, the brain to Hindenburg's bulldog presence. Telegrams pile on the table between them. Two Russian armies are advancing into East Prussia, threatening to swallow the homeland's soil. Panic grips Berlin, but here, in this cramped rail car, there's no panic, just geometry. They call it the Battle of Tannenberg, though it's really a dance of rail schedules and intercepted messages. A German codebreaker, listening in on unsecured Russian transmissions, discovers the Tsar's generals are moving carelessly, marching separately without coordination, like two jugglers tossing knives blindfolded. You, eavesdropping through time, can almost hear the opportunity crackle in the air. The Germans strike. At dawn, the fields near Allenstein bloom with gunfire. You feel the shock of artillery under your feet, hear the echo of shouted orders bouncing through the woods. The German Eighth Army, outnumbered 2-1, encircles the Russians with mathematical precision. When the trap snaps shut, it's brutal. Tens of thousands of Russian soldiers march straight into captivity, more than 90,000 by week's end. General Samsonov, humiliated, vanishes into the forest and turns his revolver on himself. Berlin erupts in joy. The headlines scream Tannenberg, a new Sedan, referencing the great Prussian victory over France decades earlier. Parades bloom in the streets. The Kaiser beams for the cameras. For a moment, Germany remembers what winning feels like. Historical fact. After Tannenberg and the subsequent Battle of the Masurian Lakes, Russia lost nearly 250,000 men in a single month. It's the kind of number that stops sounding real until you picture the faces. The victory stabilizes the Eastern Front, at least for a while, but it comes at a hidden cost. Confidence. Germany starts to believe it can juggle two fronts indefinitely. You and I already know that's a fatal illusion. Here's a quirky fact. Hindenburg's cult of personality grows so enormous that parents start naming their children after him, and bakeries sell Hindenburg rolls. Ludendorff gets none of the bread, only the work, and he resents it. Their partnership, forged in fire, will one day curdle into rivalry, and yet as triumphant as Tannenberg seems, you can already sense the flaw. The Eastern victories consume men and munitions that the West can't spare. Trains that should have carried shells to Flanders are now hauling prisoners east. Germany has bought safety at the price of stamina. Historians still debate it. Was it worth it? Some argue the Eastern triumph saved the empire from early collapse. Others insist it fatally distracted the general staff from finishing the job in France. You stand between the two fronts like a ghost in a mirror, watching Germany stretch itself thinner with every success. By 1915, the war in the East mutates into something strange. It's mobile, fluid, terrifyingly vast. You watch columns of troops march through Polish villages that barely exist anymore, towns burned and rebuilt and burned again. Refugees trail behind carts, carrying everything they own in shawls. The German advance carves its way deep into Russian territory, but the deeper it goes, the more it sinks into mud and hunger. Roads dissolve, horses die, supplies vanish. You can feel the empire wheezing under its own ambition. At headquarters, officers talk about Drang nach Osten, the push to the east, as if it's destiny, a noble return to some medieval crusade. But what it looks like on the ground is a rolling disaster of logistics and human misery. Villages looted, fields stripped bare, locals treated as obstacles instead of people. You realise Germany isn't just fighting a war, it's planting the idea of domination, one that will outlive even the Kaiser's dreams. Somewhere in the distance, the Russians burn their own towns rather than let the Germans use them. The sky turns orange for weeks. The smell of ash follows you like a shadow. Meanwhile, back home, the victory parades fade, replaced by ration lines. The first food shortages begin. Bread prices creep upward. Berliners start calling turnips the national vegetable. The same railways that carried soldiers now struggle to carry grain. It's subtle, but the empire is beginning to starve. You find yourself in a train car full of wounded soldiers heading west. Their uniforms are crusted with mud from 1,000 miles away. One man stares out the window, eyes hollow, muttering, we win, but we don't go home." Another laughs, a dry, hopeless sound. Victory doesn't feel like victory anymore. It feels like postponing the inevitable. A stray thought. Had Germany stayed defensive in the east, focused on breaking through in France, could history have bent differently? You can almost see the map splitting, futures peeling away like paper. In one, Germany holds, consolidates, perhaps even forces peace before America wakes up. In this one, the real one, it keeps reaching, and the reach becomes the fall. By late 1916, the Eastern Front is a graveyard of empires. Russia's army is disintegrating, and yet Germany feels no relief, only exhaustion. You stand at a rail station where new recruits, boys with downy moustaches, board trains with rifles too big for their shoulders. Their mothers wave kerchiefs, their fathers stay silent. No one believes in Christmas victories anymore. You catch a headline fluttering by, "Our foes falter," but beneath it, another smaller one, "Bread ration reduced." It's the kind of quiet detail that says more than any speech. Out here in the East, Germany wins battle after battle, but the victories taste of ash. For every Russian regiment destroyed, another winter rises up to take its place. For every village captured, another wound opens back home. And when you close your eyes, you can still hear the faint echoing gunfire of Tannenberg. Once a triumph, now a ghostly drumbeat counting down the Empire's strength. You drift back west across fields scorched by artillery and through towns where nothing stands higher than your knees. By 1916, Berlin's lights glow dimmer. The city breathes shallowly. The soldiers at the front may be holding the line, but the empire behind them is starting to starve. Welcome to the German home front, the part of the war that doesn't make the posters. It's January, freezing, and you can smell the shortage before you see it. The bakeries open before dawn, and the line already wraps around the corner. Men in greatcoats stamp their feet to stay warm, while women hold ration cards like lottery tickets. There's talk of the turnip winter, and it's not just talk. Potatoes have vanished, so the government tells people to eat turnips instead. Boil them, fry them, mash them, pretend they're anything else. Children groan at the sight, but hunger doesn't argue. Inside a cramped Berlin apartment, you watch a mother scrape the bottom of a pot. The room smells faintly of cabbage and coal dust. She divides a greyish stew between 3 chipped bowls, pretending not to notice that her portion's the smallest. Her husband's at the front, her son's learning arithmetic with fingers that can't quite hold a pencil steady anymore. It's a quiet battle fought with spoons instead of rifles. Here's a cold historical fact. By the winter of 1916-17, the average German civilian was living on fewer than 1,000 calories a day. Malnutrition, scurvy and tuberculosis were spreading faster than patriotism. You pass posters plastered over brick walls. Hunger for victory. Waste nothing. Even the smallest crumb feeds the fatherland. Each one shouts a little louder because the truth underneath them is whispering the opposite. You catch yourself wondering whether morale is just another rationed commodity. Factories roar day and night, the air thick with coal and sweat. The munitions workers, mostly women now, their hair tucked under scarves, move with mechanical rhythm, pressing shell casings, mixing powder, coughing. You feel the vibration of their labour in your ribs. The empire runs on their exhaustion. And yet, in those same factories, whispers of discontent spread like smoke. The Social Democrats, long the voice of the working class, are split. Some preach loyalty, win first, argue later. Others mutter about strikes, about peace, about how this isn't their war. Police informers hover like vultures, but you can tell something underground is shifting. Here's a quirky fact. Berliners developed over 200 turnip recipes during that winter. Turnip sausage, turnip pudding, even turnip coffee. None of them helped morale, but it gave the newspapers something cheerful to print between casualty lists. Meanwhile, on the farms, the horses are gone, requisitioned for the front. Oxen plough where horses once did, then women where oxen once did. Fields yield less every season, partly from lack of fertiliser, partly because every young man who knew how to work them is either dead or writing home from a trench. The British blockade doesn't just squeeze ports, it strangles possibility. The North Sea is effectively closed, and neutral ships risk seizure. Everything Germany once imported, rubber, nitrates, cocoa, coffee, even cotton, is now contraband. Substitute goods flood the market. Ersatz leather, ersatz bread, ersatz hope. You walk through a department store where mannequins wear shoes made from paper. They crumple if it rains. The clerk smiles as if it's progress, not desperation. You nod politely. Historians still argue about the blockade's legality. Was starving civilians an acceptable tactic? Britain said yes. Necessity made everything moral. Germany said no. Necessity made everything monstrous. What no one disputes is its effect. The empire's economy, once an industrial marvel, turns brittle. Every shortage at home means one less gun at the front. And yet, oddly, nationalism burns hotter as the stomachs grow emptier. The government launches Vaterländischer Unterricht, patriotic education programs, to keep morale fed if bellies aren't. Children memorize oaths, sing songs about endurance. Teachers whisper about spies and traitors, warning kids to report anyone defeatist. Even the toys change. Tin soldiers with painted smiles, wooden tanks carved from firewood. But the cracks keep widening. You pass through a protest in Leipzig, mostly women demanding more food, waving placards that say, "Bread, not bullets." Police shove them back, but the crowd doesn't scatter. Someone throws a rock. Someone else starts a chant. For a moment you feel the tremor that will, years later, become a revolution. At night, Berliners sit by candlelight. Electricity's rationed. They listen to rumours instead of news, that peace is coming soon, that France is collapsing, that submarines will break the blockade. Every rumour tastes sweet for a moment before it dissolves. You find yourself in a smoky beer hall, beer now watered down to half strength, and overhear two veterans home on leave. One says, "The English think they can starve us." The other laughs, "They can try." "We'll eat the wolves first." It sounds brave, until you notice the empty plates. The next morning the newspapers print the casualty list from Verdun. Thousands of names, black ink on grey paper. People stop reading them after a while. They just scan for familiar surnames, then fold the page in silence. The scholarly debate here is about timing. When exactly did Germany's defeat begin? Some say it started at the Marne in 1914. Others point right here to the home front, where hunger gnawed faster than bullets. You watch a soldier on leave stare at a shop window displaying rubberless boots and substitute jam, and know the answer doesn't matter. Wars aren't lost in one moment. They're eroded, spoonful by spoonful. You walk past the Brandenburg Gate again, the same spot you stood in before the war began. The lights are dimmer now, the laughter forced. A beggar in a torn uniform holds out his cap. You recognise the medals on his chest. He's seen Tannenberg, maybe the Somme. You drop a coin in, though you know it buys nothing. Berlin still calls itself the heart of Europe, but you can feel the arrhythmia. Every heartbeat slower, every echo fainter. The empire hasn't fallen yet, but it's already starving to death from the inside out. You wake up choking. The air smells like bleach and pepper, your eyes water, and for a second you can't tell which way is up. When your vision clears, you're standing in a ditch outside Ypres, Belgium, 1915. Welcome to the laboratory of death. Germany, the nation that gave the world aspirin and x-rays, has decided to weaponize the periodic table. It begins quietly, almost politely. Cylinders, thousands of them, line the parapet. The men handling them wear makeshift masks. Flannel soaked in bicarbonate or urine. Orders hiss through the line, winds right, open the valves. You hear the clink of metal, the dull groan of pressure released, and then it comes. A green-grey mist sliding over no man's land like something alive. Within minutes, the French colonial troops opposite begin coughing, screaming, clawing at their throats. They stumble out of their trenches, eyes blistered, lungs dissolving. You can smell it even from here. Sharp, sweet, wrong. Chlorine, the same gas used to clean swimming pools, now turned loose to scrub away humanity. The German soldiers stare, half awed, half horrified. No one told them what to expect. The wind shifts a little and the mist licks back toward them. Men drop the valves, sprint for cover, coughing up green foam. Science doesn't discriminate. It only reacts. Historical fact, April 22nd, 1915, marks the first successful large-scale chemical attack in history. 6,000 men died within 10 minutes, many drowning on dry land. The German High Command called it a technical success. The rest of the world called it barbarism. You follow the surviving French as they stagger away, abandoning a 4-mile gap in the line. But the Germans don't exploit it. They don't have masks, they don't have reserves ready, they don't even have a plan. The opportunity evaporates, leaving only the aftertaste of chlorine and guilt. Here's your quirky fact. The chemist who pioneered the attack, Fritz Haber, believed he was serving humanity by shortening the war. His wife, also a scientist, thought otherwise. She took her own life a few weeks later. He went on to win a Nobel Prize. Morality, it seems, doesn't come with lab goggles. The debate that still simmers among scholars: was gas warfare a war crime before anyone knew what a war crime was? Some argue the Hague Conventions had already banned poisonous weapons. Others insist the line between explosive and poisonous was conveniently blurry when victory was at stake. What's clear is that after Ypres, no one hesitated again. Britain, France, Russia all raced to perfect their own clouds. The genie wasn't just out of the bottle, it was designing better bottles. You wander the shattered fields weeks later. The grass is gone, trees stripped bare, shell holes fill with neon green water, the soil itself seems to recoil from sunlight. You kneel, scoop a handful of dirt, and it smells sterile, dead in the most literal sense. This is what modernity smells like when it rots. Behind the front, Germany celebrates the new Wunderwaffe, the wonder weapon. Newspapers call it proof of German ingenuity. The Kaiser sends congratulations. In the university halls of Berlin, chemists debate improvements between lectures. You can almost hear the pride cracking under its own hypocrisy. But the weapon bites back. By 1916, both sides are using phosgene, a gas that kills quietly hours after inhalation, and mustard gas, which burns skin to leather. Soldiers start calling the front the gas chamber without walls. You stand in a dressing station one night watching medics smear white paste over raw flesh. A young private blinks at you through swollen lids. "It smells like garlic," he croaks. You nod. Garlic and hell. Back home, German propaganda insists the Allies started the gas war. The Allies say the opposite. The truth, as usual, is somewhere between intent and opportunity. Everyone's guilty, and everyone feels justified. Still, Germany holds an edge in chemistry. You pass through BASF's sprawling plant at Ludwigshafen, where chemists in rubber aprons mix nitrates by the ton. Their work keeps both shells and crops alive, an irony so sharp it could cut steel. The same mines feeding the war also feed the people. Without synthetic fertilizer, the empire would already be starving. Another strange sight. School children collecting horse chestnuts in baskets. The nuts contain acetone, used to make explosives. Teachers call it patriotic botany. You realize every aspect of life now bends toward combustion. And yet, even as Germany innovates, it's fighting physics itself. The more complex the weapons, the more scarce the materials. Copper, tin, rubber, all rationed. Every shell fired means one fewer kettle, one fewer telephone line, one more hollow note in the home front's song. Late one evening, you sit beside a German artillery crew cleaning gas shells. They joke quietly, trying to chase away the tension. One says, "Someday there'll be a weapon that kills without blood or sound." Another replies, "Someday we'll be the weapons." They both laugh, then cough for a long time. The wind shifts again, carrying the faint smell of chlorine from somewhere down the line. The sergeant spits and mutters, "Better them than us." You look around at the grey faces, the rusted cans, the empty horizon, and realise there's no us left. Only endurance measured in breaths that taste like chemicals. Historians later note that gas caused fewer than 5% of total war deaths, but its psychological toll was immeasurable. You can see why. It wasn't just death, it was betrayal by the air itself. You climb a small ridge at dawn. The battlefield below is ghostly. Craters filled with mist, trees like skeletons, nothing moving. The sun tries to rise through a green haze and fails. For the first time, you understand that Germany hasn't just changed how wars are fought, it's changed what war is. The future, you realise, will always smell faintly of gas. You're standing on a North Sea pier in early 1916, wind slapping your coat and the horizon an endless smear of grey. Somewhere out there, the British Grand Fleet is waiting, a silent wall of steel, and you can almost hear its heartbeat deep under the waves. This is where Germany begins to suffocate, not by cannon or bayonet, but by hunger. The blockade isn't dramatic, it's invisible, which somehow makes it crueler. You can't see the ships tightening the noose, but you can feel their shadow across every German table. Britain's navy, undisputed queen of the seas, has turned the North Sea into a prison fence. No food, no raw materials, no trade. Germany may command the land, but the sea belongs entirely to someone else. You watch a convoy of fishing boats returning to Wilhelmshaven. Their nets hang empty, the sailors' faces tight with frustration. Even the herring have fled, or so it seems. The British patrol sees any vessel that looks suspicious, which to them is all of them. The ocean has become a rumour. Back in Berlin, the Ministry of War keeps issuing optimistic bulletins. Imports will resume soon. But you've seen the warehouses, half empty, then a quarter, then echoes. The British blockade doesn't just starve Germany's stomach, it starves its factories, its confidence, its will. Historical fact. By the end of the war, malnutrition and disease caused by the blockade had killed an estimated 400,000 German civilians. The number sits quietly in textbooks, but if you close your eyes, you can hear the empty plates clattering. Germany's answer to the blockade comes from beneath the waves, the U-boats. Sleek, narrow, claustrophobic. They're a new kind of terror. You follow one down the slipway, the air thick with diesel and salt. Inside, it smells like oil and fear. 25 men in a tube the size of a bus, all living inches from pressure that could crush them flat. Their mission? Sink everything flying an Allied flag, maybe even neutral ships if they're unlucky enough to carry contraband. In theory, it's retaliation. In practice, it's desperation with a periscope. The quirky fact here, early U-boat crews were forbidden to bathe during missions because fresh water was too precious. They went weeks in the same clothes, the air so foul that officers carried bottles of perfume to mask the stench. Romanticised in propaganda posters, these men smelled like their own legend, rancid, brave, and doomed. The U-boats strike fear into the world, they torpedo merchant ships without warning, and the headlines scream Pirates of the Sea. America protests. Britain rages. Germany shrugs. Survival has no room for etiquette, and yet, the blockade doesn't loosen. For every freighter sunk, 10 more arrive under new flags. Britain, backed by empire, can afford the losses. Germany can't. You realise this is a war of lungs. Who can keep breathing longest? And the island nation has the bigger pair. One chilly night, you're aboard U-20, gliding through the Irish Sea. The captain, a young man with steady eyes, spots a distant shape through his periscope. A passenger liner, large, fast, flying no flags. Orders say if it might be carrying munitions, it's fair game. He hesitates for maybe 2 seconds, then gives the command. The torpedo hits amidships. You feel the vibration even here underwater. The Lusitania sinks in 18 minutes, taking nearly 1,200 civilians with it, 128 of them Americans. The sea swallows their cries, but the headlines carry them worldwide. Within days, the United States, still officially neutral, calls it an outrage against civilization. Germany defends itself. The ship was carrying ammunition, they insist. It actually was, though that detail matters little to the drowned. The Kaiser orders a pause in unrestricted submarine warfare. Temporarily. The damage, both diplomatic and moral, is done. You step ashore in Hamburg and feel the tension everywhere. People glare at the British in their imaginations and at the government in private. Rumours multiply faster than food supplies. We'll win by science, the newspapers say. But science can't make bread appear out of nowhere. The blockade's reach extends to the front lines too. Shells run short, horses thin out, boots fall apart. Soldiers start writing home not for love, but for soap, socks, anything that smells like normal life. Scholars still debate whether the blockade alone could have beaten Germany. Some say yes. It starved the war machine until it seized up. Others argue no. Germany's leaders refused to negotiate, even as people fainted in the streets. The truth, as usual, is a grim handshake of both. You wander into a small-town grocery, if you can call it that. The shelves are mostly empty. Behind the counter, a sign reads, Bitte nur Ersatzprodukte, substitutes only. There's coffee made from acorns, butter made from mashed turnips, meat that might not be meat. The shopkeeper laughs when you ask what it is. Don't ask, she says. It's patriotism. Another quirky image, the K-brot, or war bread, stretched with potato flour and straw pulp. The government insists it's healthy. Everyone else calls it sawdust. Children bite it anyway. You return to the docks and look out over the dark sea again. Somewhere beyond the horizon, British cruisers sit like ghosts, unseen but always there. You picture the Admiralty in London, men in clean uniforms plotting rations for an entire empire, while across the water, German families share one loaf for 3 days. The blockade's cruelty lies in its patience. It doesn't conquer, it waits. You feel that waiting in your bones, in the rhythm of a heart beating slower each month. By late 1916, Germany resumes unrestricted submarine warfare, gambling that starvation will break Britain before it brings America into the war. It's a high-stakes bluff, and history's about to call it. For now, though, the seas remain closed, and Germany, proud and efficient, finds itself gasping. The empire built on iron and order is learning the hardest lesson of all. Even the strongest machine rusts when you cut off its oxygen. You step off the train in Berlin again, and it's like walking into a stage set built from exhaustion. Posters still scream triumph, but the colours are fading. The cafes hum with chatter that's half patriotic, half paranoid. The war may be fought with guns and ships, but here, in the cafes and newspapers, the real battle is for belief. You sit at a small table near the window. The waiter brings you kaffee ersatz, coffee made from roasted barley. It tastes like regret and burnt toast. Across the room, two men argue in low voices. One quotes headlines about victories in the east. The other mutters about missing rations and rumours of unrest. You can tell which one still reads the papers for comfort. Propaganda has become Germany's oxygen. In the early years, it was almost charming. Bright posters, heroic slogans, smiling soldiers. By 1916, it's everywhere. Plastered across walls, broadcast in speeches, woven into school lessons. The truth is no longer rationed, it's replaced. Historical fact. In October 1914, Germany created the Zentralstelle für Auslandsdienst, its first centralised propaganda office. By 1917, it controlled nearly every newspaper, magazine and cinema reel in the country. Freedom of the press had been the first casualty long before Verdun. You flip through a copy of Berliner Illustrierte Zeitung. The cover shows a clean, confident soldier shaking hands with a farmer. Inside, the headlines boast of victories at Riga and the sinking of another enemy transport. The fine print lists food restrictions, funeral notices, and new rules about how much flour each household can use. The contrast would be funny if it weren't so perfectly tragic. Here's your quirky fact. To boost morale, Germany introduced victory toys for children. Tin soldiers made from recycled shell casings, puzzle games showing submarines hunting British ships, even miniature trenches complete with barbed wire. It was supposed to keep patriotism playful. Instead, it taught kids how to dig graves in miniature. The propaganda isn't just for the home front. The army churns out its own leaflets, claiming that British and French soldiers are demoralised, that the Russians are surrendering by the thousands. Some of it's true, most of it's wishful thinking. The soldiers in the trenches barely bother to read them anymore. Tell us when it's over, one says, lighting a cigarette with a leaflet corner. By now, censorship has become an art form. Every letter home passes through military censors who slice out anything gloomy. The result? A country talking to itself in happy lies. Mothers write, "Stay brave," because that's what they think they're supposed to say. Sons write, "We're winning," because anything else might get them punished. You can almost feel the silence building like pressure in a sealed jar. The scholarly debate? How much did propaganda actually matter? Some argue it kept morale high enough to fight for 4 grinding years. Others say it backfired, breeding cynicism when the truth inevitably bled through. Maybe it's both, an opiate that worked until the pain grew stronger. You walk through a cinema showing Beyoncé and Helden under Somme, with our heroes at the Somme. The audience watches grainy footage of smiling soldiers, clean uniforms, laughter, camaraderie. You've seen the real Somme, and this isn't it. The theatre smells of tobacco and disbelief. When the lights come up, people clap out of habit, not faith. Outside, you pass a small crowd gathered around a speaker shouting slogans through a megaphone. "Every sacrifice brings victory," he cries, voice cracking. Someone heckles, "How much longer?" The police step in before the question can echo. In the back streets, black market traders whisper about sugar, soap, and American cigarettes. A pound of coffee costs a week's wages. The newspapers call them traitors. The public calls them lifesavers. You see a soldier's wife trade her wedding ring for a loaf of bread and no one looks away. Another quirky little scene. Berlin's cabarets, forbidden to perform anything defeatist, turn satire into camouflage. The comedians joke about endless lines and heroic turnips, and the audience laughs too loudly because laughing is still allowed. Beneath the laughter, though, you can feel the exhaustion humming like an undercurrent. Every empire needs illusions, and Germany's are running thin. The generals feed the government optimism, the government feeds the press optimism, and the press feeds the people optimism. But it's all circular, a snake devouring its own tail. You pick up a rumour in a tavern that General Ludendorff has taken over strategy completely, that the civilian government barely exists anymore. Someone mutters, "We're ruled by ghosts in uniform." Another answers, "At least ghosts don't need food." You can't help noticing the irony. Germany, the land of poets and philosophers, now survives on slogans. Nietzsche would have had a field day. Out on Unter den Linden, you watch a military parade roll past. The marching band plays loudly, the drums crisp, the banners bright. But you can see how thin the ranks are, how many of the men limp, how many uniforms don't quite fit. The crowd cheers, but the cheers sound practiced. There's a man selling newspapers shouting, "Victory near!" and you almost admire his optimism. Victory has become a word stretched so thin it's practically transparent. The historians who study this period often argue about the emotional anatomy of defeat. Was it the hunger, the grief, the endless lies? Maybe it was the slow realization that the truth had been rationed too. You can almost hear the public's faith cracking, the sound softer than a shell burst, but far more final. As night falls, you walk past the Reichstag. Its lights burn late, but the debates inside are mostly theatre now. Germany's real decisions are made in army headquarters, and its real morale depends on keeping the illusion alive one more day. Above you, the sky glows faintly from distant fires on the front. You think about those bright propaganda posters, the cheerful faces, the brave smiles, and realise they're not wrong. They just left out the smoke. The ground shakes. You're not in Berlin anymore. You're standing near Verdun, 1916. It's February, and the cold bites like punishment. The horizon is a continuous flicker of orange flashes, the sound a constant grinding thunder that never stops. If hell had an address, it would be here. The German plan seems simple. Bleed France white. Verdun isn't chosen for strategy. It's chosen for symbolism. It's the heart of French pride, an ancient fortress town whose name rings with centuries of military glory. General Erich von Falkenhayn, Germany's chief of staff, believes that by hammering Verdun, he can break France's will to fight. "We will bleed them dry," he says. He imagines a tidy equation. French losses greater than German losses equals victory. Simple math, except that math doesn't scream, or rot, or write home. You follow the first shells as they whistle overhead, thousands of them, turning the earth into smoke and splinters. Within a day, the landscape disappears. Hills flatten, forests vanish, forts crumble. You can't tell where sky ends and mud begins. Historical fact. In the first week of the Battle of Verdun, the Germans fired over 2 million shells. By the time it ends 10 months later, the total will exceed 30 million. The numbers are too big to feel real, so imagine this. Every square metre of soil struck multiple times, every breath tasting like metal. You walk through the German trenches as troops prepare to advance. Helmets gleam, rifles stacked, faces blank. They've been told Verdun will fall in 2 days. It doesn't. The French refuse to die properly. They funnel reinforcements through a single supply road, the Voie Sacrée, where trucks roll in endlessly, 24 hours a day, engines roaring, carrying ammunition, bread, and courage. The French commander, Philippe Pétain, repeats one phrase like a prayer. Ils ne passeront pas. They shall not pass. You can almost hear it humming in the smoke. Germany's initial assault crushes through several outer forts, Douaumont, Vaux, but something shifts after that. The mud, the terrain, the sheer stubbornness of the defenders turns every metre into a graveyard. You follow a platoon advancing across open ground. The air vibrates with shell fire. Men sink to their waists in mud, disappear, reappear, fall again. The wounded scream for hours because no one can reach them. You can smell cordite, decay, and something sweet that doesn't belong. It's the stench of exploded soil mixed with human breath. The quirky fact: Verdun's shelling was so intense that it permanently altered the landscape's chemistry. Even today, farmers there find unexploded shells by the hundreds every year. Locals call them iron harvests. A century later, the war still grows from the ground. As you move deeper into the chaos, you realise the battle isn't a fight for land anymore. It's a war of nerves. Falkenhayn wanted to bleed France, but the wound runs both ways. Every time the French counterattack, German troops are forced to retake the same ruined ground. The men begin to call it the mill, because it grinds everyone, French or German, into dust. A young German soldier sits beside you one night, chain-smoking until his hands shake. "We came here to take a hill," he says. "Now we are the hill." He laughs, and it sounds like breaking glass. Behind the lines, Falkenhayn insists the plan is working. "The French are losing more men than we are," he writes. He's technically correct, until he's not. The longer the fight drags on, the more the advantage erodes. Germany is bleeding too, and unlike France, it's fighting a two-front war. Scholarly debate still smoulders over Verdun. Was it a necessary offensive or pure madness? Some historians argue Falkenhayn intended to force France to negotiate. Others think he simply miscalculated. The fatal arrogance of assuming war could still be controlled. You stand in the middle of the cratered field and realise both could be true. Summer comes, but Verdun never brightens. Heat bakes the corpses. The air buzzes with flies. Soldiers go half mad from exhaustion. Some start talking to the dead, others forget their own names. Artillery crews develop what they call shell shock, a trembling paralysis that no one yet understands. You can see it in their eyes. They've seen too much of the world turned inside out. By December, the battle sputters to an end, not because anyone wins, but because both sides simply can't keep going. The French retake their lost forts, the Germans pull back slightly, and everyone calls it over. But nothing really ends. The total casualties, around 700,000, and the front line, after all that horror, has barely moved. Germany has proven its army's endurance, but at a cost it can't afford. The morale that cracked at home during the turnip winter is now breaking at the front. You can feel it in every trench, every letter, every hollow laugh. Another quirky note: soldiers at Verdun started giving names to the shells. Big Bertha, the singing Minnie, Whistling Willie. It was superstition, the belief that naming death made it less random. It didn't work, but it gave them something to talk to. In Berlin, the newspapers hail Verdun as a German triumph. The French army is broken, one headline boasts. But you've been there, and you know the truth. Nothing broke except souls. The French didn't fall, and Germany didn't advance. The Empire won nothing but another reason to keep dying. As winter closes in again, you walk along the frozen Meuse River. The fog hangs low, muffling everything. Somewhere out there, 1,000 boots crunch in the frost. You realise Verdun isn't just a battle, it's a prophecy. Germany has learned how to endure anything, but not when to stop. The ground you're standing on trembles, not from thunder, but from artillery rolling toward the front. It's July 1916, and you've just crossed to the other side of the Western Front. The British and French have chosen a quiet stretch of the Somme River to make some noise of their own. For Germany, Verdun isn't over yet, but history has no patience for rest. It begins with 7 straight days of shelling. The British fire more than 1.5 million shells, the largest bombardment the world has ever seen. You can hear it from London. The idea is simple. Obliterate the German lines, turn them into dust and walk across. You already know how this goes. Plans are neat, people are not. The morning of July 1st, the guns stop. For a few seconds, there's silence. You can almost hear birds. Then, at precisely 7:30 a.m, the whistles blow. Lines of British soldiers climb from their trenches, their rifles slung, walking as if this were a parade. They think nothing's left alive ahead of them, but the Germans have been living deep underground, in bunkers reinforced with concrete, waiting. The moment the British silhouettes appear on the skyline, the machine guns open up. The air becomes a saw blade. Entire companies vanish in seconds. Men stumble forward through smoke, through wire that wasn't cut, tripping over the bodies of their friends. The Somme becomes a slaughterhouse by sunrise. Historical fact. On the first day of the Battle of the Somme, Britain suffers nearly 60,000 casualties, 19,000 dead. It's still the bloodiest day in British military history. You're there in the German trenches watching in disbelief as wave after wave keeps coming. The soldiers joke grimly that they don't even have to aim. A corporal named Adolf Hitler, somewhere nearby, writes later that the sky flamed like a sea of fire. He'll remember that too well. The battle lasts 5 months. The ground turns to soup, the rivers to sludge, the men to ghosts who just haven't realised it yet. Tanks appear for the first time, big clumsy beasts that crawl forward belching smoke and fire. The Germans panic the first time they see one, then quickly learn how to kill them with artillery. Technology never stays miraculous for long. A quirky fact. Some British tanks carried carrier pigeons inside in case their radios failed. One pigeon, named William of Orange, later received a medal for bravery. You smile at the absurdity, humanity giving medals to birds for surviving the wars it starts. By autumn, the Somme front looks like the moon. Craters within craters, rivers flowing red. Mud becomes a new kind of enemy. Soldiers drown in it, pulled under by the suction. You see helmets floating like lilies on a dead pond. Germany bleeds heavily here too. Verdun and the Somme grind its army from two sides, turning even victories into losses. You can feel it in the letters home. "We hold," one writes, "but who will hold us?" Behind the lines, General Erich von Falkenhayn finally loses the Kaiser's confidence. Too cautious for the war he helped prolong, he's replaced by a new duo, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, the heroes of Tannenberg. The nation hails them as saviours. They prefer the term architects. Historians still debate the Hindenburg myth, whether they saved Germany from collapse or only managed its slow death more efficiently. Either way, they now control everything: strategy, production, even politics. Civilians take orders from soldiers. The lines between government and army blur until you can't tell who's in charge, only that they all wear uniforms. You watch as the new High Command launches the Hindenburg program, a massive push to mobilise every resource, every worker, every ounce of energy. Industry must produce more guns, more shells, more death. Efficiency becomes religion. They call it total war. The phrase fits too well, but in the mud of the Somme, efficiency is meaningless. You crouch beside a German machine gun crew whose gun barrel glows red from firing all day. They eat from a tin, hands shaking. "They keep coming," one murmurs, voice hollow. "We keep shooting." That's all there is. The scholarly debate. Did the Somme save Verdun or doom Germany? Some argue the Allied offensive forced Germany to divert men and guns, preventing total French collapse. Others insist it drained Germany's last reserves of morale. The truth feels simpler and darker. By 1916, nobody's winning and everyone's losing slower. Back home, the Kaiser still gives speeches about glory and duty. But when you walk Berlin's streets, glory smells like coal smoke and hunger. The blockade tightens, the propaganda grows shriller. Posters promise final victory. People stop looking up at them. The Somme drags on through summer into a grey, sodden autumn. By November, both sides have lost over 1 million men combined. The line has moved less than 10 miles. You stand at the edge of one of the great craters, water filling its bottom, and watch the reflection of a burned-out tree flicker in the ripples. It looks like the world folding in on itself. Quirky little detail. Soldiers at the Somme coined new words to describe the horror. Blighty wound for an injury bad enough to send them home. Plum pudding for artillery craters. Going over the top for that suicidal charge into gunfire. Every euphemism another layer of denial. At night you hear singing across the lines again. German voices, British voices, something strangely tender after a day of slaughter. They sing the same hymn, "Abide with me." For a moment the war remembers it's full of humans. Then the flares go up, and the machine guns start again. When the battle finally ends, nothing really ends. The generals call it a victory because the map says so. But you've seen Verdun, and you've seen the Somme. You know the map's lying. Germany holds its ground, but the cost is invisible ink, the kind that only shows up years later, when you hold history to the light. Behind the triumphs, there's rot. In the fields, in the factories, in the hearts of men who've stopped believing in the cause but keep fighting anyway. The empire still stands, but its shadow stretches long now, cast by fire and smoke. The Somme has proven one thing beyond doubt: you can win every battle and still be losing the war. The map tilts east again, and you find yourself staring at the Baltic Sea, where the waves are grey and cold as iron. It's late 1916, and Germany's generals are chasing the illusion of momentum. If the West is a wound that won't close, maybe the East still holds promise, a place where the front lines move, where victory still means something. You ride along in a rail car bound for Romania, the air thick with smoke and false confidence. Hindenburg and Ludendorff, now running the show, promised new offensives that will finally knock Russia out of the war. After all, Russia's army's crumbling, poorly supplied, badly led, half-starved. But Germany's own strength is thinner than it looks. The soldiers in this train talk in half whispers, their boots worn through, their uniforms patched with scraps of curtain fabric. Even triumph looks threadbare now. The Romanian campaign begins fast and brutal. Romania, freshly joined to the Allied side, hopes for quick gains against the Austro-Hungarians. Instead, it runs straight into the German steamroller. You stand on a hillside watching the 9th Army under Falkenhayn sweep through the Carpathians, flanking, surrounding, swallowing. By Christmas 1916, Bucharest falls. Germany cheers. It's a real, tangible victory for once. Historical fact: the Central Powers' capture of Romania secured vital oil fields and grain supplies, briefly relieving Germany's economic chokehold. For a moment, the empire breathes easier. You walk the streets of occupied Bucharest. German soldiers pose for photographs beside captured oil derricks. Romanian civilians stare from windows with the cold fury of the conquered. There's bread again in Berlin, Romanian bread, and the newspapers boast of victory in the east. But behind the headlines you can feel the cost rising. Every new occupation means more troops tied down, more resentment, more front lines to feed. Meanwhile, up north, the war in the Baltic churns like a fever dream. German troops push through Courland and Livonia, modern-day Latvia and Estonia, seizing vast frozen plains. It feels less like conquest and more like migration. Armies moving through emptiness, trying to remember what winning is supposed to feel like. The quirky fact: German soldiers in the Baltic nicknamed their rations turnip à la Russia. They joked that even the enemy's soil tasted like home now, half-starved and overcooked. Gallows humour travels light. But for all its military success, the Eastern Campaign starts to eat Germany alive in other ways. The front is endless, the roads impassable, the supply chains stretched until they squeak. Horses die by the thousands in the snow, men freeze beside their own campfires. The empire has expanded, but like a balloon stretched too thin. You walk past field hospitals full of frostbite and typhus. The nurses are efficient, expressionless. One hums a lullaby as she changes bandages that look more like rags. "We used to sing this to babies," she says softly. "Now we sing to ghosts." Historians still argue whether Germany's push east was strategic brilliance or logistical suicide. Some call it a masterstroke that forced Russia into collapse. Others point out that every mile gained pulled resources from the west, where the real decision waited. The truth might be simpler. Germany couldn't stop moving because stillness meant admitting it was stuck. You pass through Riga as shells fall across the Dvina River. German engineers, efficient as ever, build bridges from anything: logs, barrels, the remains of churches. The soldiers cross muttering, "Nach Hause, nach Hause," but the path home never points west. By 1917, Russia is breaking apart under the weight of its own chaos. The Tsar abdicates, revolution simmers, and the new provisional government keeps promising reforms it can't deliver. To German eyes, this looks like divine intervention. "The bear has clawed itself to death," one officer says, grinning. "We only need to watch it bleed." And then, out of nowhere, the strangest figure steps onto the stage: Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. You're in a sealed train car travelling from Zurich to Petrograd, and the air smells of tobacco and conspiracy. The Germans are behind it. They've decided to send Lenin back into Russia like a weapon, an infection. The idea is simple. If he topples the Russian government, the Eastern Front disappears. It's one of history's most successful and dangerous gambles. Lenin arrives. Russia implodes. The Bolsheviks seize power in November 1917, preaching peace, land and bread. Germany gets at least one of those words. Within months, they're at the negotiating table at Brest-Litovsk dictating terms. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed in March 1918, gives Germany everything it could dream of: Ukraine, the Baltic states, Poland. It's the empire's eastern fantasy realised: a vast swath of land rich in grain and resources. Historical fact: the treaty stripped Russia of more than 1 million square miles of territory and nearly a third of its population. Germany's leaders called it the Peace of Victory. You walk through Kiev, now under German control. The streets are strangely quiet. The locals are polite but distant. A soldier selling cigarettes tells you, "We've won too much." It feels like stealing from the dead. The quirky footnote: some German officers in the east began planning settlements, dreams of a new Mitteleuropa ruled by German colonists. They drew maps that looked more like fantasies than policies. The war had become not just survival, but imagination unmoored. And yet back home, none of this feels like victory. The food shortages remain, the blockade still tightens, and the casualties keep mounting. The empire is wider than ever, and weaker than it's ever been. You can feel the paradox in the air, a body bloated and starving at once. Scholars debate whether Brest-Litovsk was Germany's last triumph or its final delusion. Some see it as buying time, others as wasting it. But as you watch German soldiers boarding trains westward, bound for France and the next offensive, one thing is certain: Whatever strength they've stolen from the east, they'll spend it all soon. As the sun sets over the Baltic, the ice gleams like polished glass. You catch your reflection and almost don't recognise it. Part conqueror, part corpse. The east has given Germany space, yes, but no peace. The war is about to come home. You wake to the creak of a ship's deck and the cry of gulls. The air is salt and smoke together, the colour of rust. You've crossed the Atlantic, it's 1917 now, and America is stirring from its long self-declared nap. Across the ocean, Germany's leaders have convinced themselves that one more gamble will break Britain. But it's a move that's about to wake the biggest giant on earth. You stand in Washington, D.C., where President Woodrow Wilson sits in his study, pen in hand, reading reports of sunken ships. Outside, the capital buzzes with isolationist comfort. America has been selling guns and butter to everyone, making money from everyone else's misery. War feels far away, until it doesn't. The Germans, desperate to choke Britain into submission, resume unrestricted submarine warfare in February 1917. No warnings, no survivors. Any ship that sails toward Britain is fair game. It's the same strategy that sank the Lusitania, only this time they mean it. The idea, cooked up in a smoky war room in Berlin, goes like this. Britain will starve before America can even mobilise. It's a perfect plan, unless you happen to know how Americans react to being told they can't go where they please. Historical fact. Within 2 months of Germany's renewed U-boat campaign, more than 800,000 tons of Allied and neutral shipping had been sent to the seafloor. Whole convoys vanished. You're on a British freighter off the coast of Ireland when it happens. The lookout barely finishes shouting "torpedo" before the sea erupts. The ship lists groaning like a dying whale. Within minutes, it's over. You tread water, watching the U-boat surface briefly to mark the kill with a flag. Efficient, impersonal, indifferent. Back in Washington, the reports pile higher. Wilson still hesitates. He's a man who believes in words, not weapons. But then another envelope lands on his desk, stamped intercepted telegram. The Zimmermann telegram. You're in the room when he opens it. It's from Germany's foreign minister, Arthur Zimmermann, to his ambassador in Mexico. The contents are jaw-dropping. If America enters the war, Germany will help Mexico reconquer Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It's part delusion, part desperation, and exactly the wrong message to send to a country with an excellent telegraph interception program. When the British decrypt it and share it with Washington, the reaction is volcanic. Newspapers print it across front pages in letters big enough to make your eyes ache. Americans who didn't care about Europe now care deeply about Texas. Quirky fact, Zimmermann, confronted by reporters, confirmed the telegram's authenticity instead of denying it. "I cannot deny it," he said calmly. "It is true." It was perhaps the single worst press conference in diplomatic history. In April 1917, Wilson steps before Congress and declares, "The world must be made safe for democracy." The chamber erupts in applause, and you can almost hear the hinges of history creak open. The United States, reluctant, idealistic, industrially unstoppable, has entered the war. The Germans shrug publicly and laugh privately. "America will send poets," one general sneers. They're not entirely wrong at first. The US Army has only a fraction of the manpower it needs, and equipment barely fit for a parade, let alone Verdun. But factories hum louder than cannon, and within months, America begins to transform itself into an arsenal. You walk through the shipyards of Philadelphia and watch hulls slide into the water faster than men can christen them. Trains scream westward, carrying wheat, coal, uniforms. Even the air feels faster. Back in Europe, the news spreads across trenches like wildfire. British soldiers cheer. French soldiers weep with relief. German soldiers scoff but secretly wonder, how many more enemies can we afford? Historians still argue about the timing. Did America's entry decide the war, or only accelerate what was already inevitable? Some say Germany might have still won had it not provoked the US. Others insist America was always destined to tip the balance once its industry awoke. What's certain is this. The clock starts ticking faster the moment Wilson signs that declaration, and the Germans know it. Inside their high command, panic and pride wrestle. Hindenburg and Ludendorff tell the Kaiser they have 1 year, just one, to finish the war before America's millions arrive. "We must strike now," Ludendorff insists. We will hit them so hard they cannot stand. It's both prophecy and doom. Meanwhile, in Germany, the home front trembles on the edge of collapse. The new hope of victory through submarine warfare hasn't delivered. The blockade still strangles. Bread is thinner, spirits lower. Even the church sermons have started sounding like obituaries. You ride one of the U-boats back to port, the men hollow-eyed, their victories feeling smaller with every sinking. "We're winning," one mutters, "but the world hates us." He's right, and he doesn't yet know how much. America's propaganda machine spins up quickly. Posters appear across the states. "Destroy this mad brute." A gorilla wearing a German helmet carrying a bloodied club. German Americans face suspicion, sometimes violence. Sauerkraut becomes Liberty cabbage. Even the language is a casualty. Quirky detail. Some American orchestras temporarily banned Beethoven and Wagner from their repertoires, as if music itself could betray democracy. You stand in a New York crowd watching doughboys march down Fifth Avenue, their rifles gleaming. The crowd throws flowers, children wave flags. It's idealism wrapped in brass bands. They don't know about Ypres or Verdun yet. You almost wish they'd stay that way. Back across the Atlantic, German leaders still insist that victory is near. In their minds, the East is won, the West is tired, and America is far away. But you've seen the shipyards, the factories, the fire. The future is crossing the ocean as fast as steel can carry it. Wilson calls the war a crusade for peace, and the phrase sticks. But the real story is simpler, colder. Germany has added another enemy it can't outlast. The empire, stretched to breaking, has just invited the weight of the modern world onto its back. As you leave the dockyard, the Atlantic wind howls through the cranes and rigging like a warning. The ocean that once fed Germany's power will now carry the storm that ends it. You're back beneath the sea, this time inside a steel tube that creaks with every shift of current. The U-boat smells of sweat, oil, and canned herring, a smell you'll never quite forget. The air is so thick you can taste the metal. The year is 1917, and Germany has doubled down on its gamble. Unrestricted submarine warfare, the weapon that's supposed to starve Britain before America can even lace up its boots. Outside, the sea is black glass. The captain peers through the periscope and murmurs, "Target at 2,000 meters." His voice is calm, almost tender. You can't see the target yet, but you can feel it. A fat cargo ship, maybe carrying grain or munitions. In this war, it doesn't matter which. Everything that floats is food. The torpedo releases with a cough and a shimmer of bubbles. A minute later, the horizon blooms orange. You feel the heat before you hear the sound. The crew cheers half-heartedly. They've seen this too often. Through the periscope, the captain watches until the last lifeboat capsizes. Then he exhales, muttering, "One more for the fatherland." Historical fact. In the first half of 1917 alone, German U-boats sank over 3 million tons of Allied and neutral shipping, more than any navy in history had destroyed before. Britain came within 6 weeks of starvation. Shops ran out of flour, people scraped the mould from bread, and entire cities rationed fuel to 1 lamp per household. And yet, as with all of Germany's decisive weapons, success carries its own poison. The world, watching from afar, sees not strategy but savagery. Neutral nations turn cold. The United States, already furious about the Lusitania and the Zimmermann telegram, now sees the U-boats as monsters. Quirky fact, British cartoonists began drawing U-boats as literal sharks, with steel fins and the Kaiser's moustache on their snouts. One London toy company even sold Kaiser sharks for children to stomp on in puddles. Propaganda works best when it's ridiculous. Inside Germany, though, the story is very different. Posters show noble submariners saving the nation from starvation. The U-boat crews are heroes, part knight, part machine. Every sinking is broadcast like a sports victory. "2 new freighters down!" the papers shout, as if tonnage were a scoreboard. You ride another patrol out of Kiel. The men are young, some barely 20, and their optimism is eerie. They sing between attacks, tell dirty jokes, carve tiny wooden mermaids from scraps of cratewood. When the air grows foul, they take turns cranking the ventilation. Life underwater becomes a rhythm of dread and routine. Then, one morning, the U-boat rises too fast. A British destroyer has been waiting. The first depth charge goes off with a sound like a god's fist. The lights flicker, the hull screams. You feel the air thicken, taste oil on your tongue. Men shout, scramble, pray. The next explosion snaps the periscope like a matchstick. The captain orders emergency ascent, and when the U-boat bursts to the surface, searchlights blind you. The deck gun fires once, twice, then silence. They scuttle her before capture. You float among the wreckage, the captain saluting his sinking ship. "At least," he says, "we made them afraid." Back on land, the results of this strategy are mixed at best. The U-boats are killing faster than the Allies can build, but Britain is adapting. Convoy systems form, guarded by destroyers with sonar and depth charges. The ocean begins to turn against its hunters. Here's another historical note. Within 6 months of the convoy system's introduction, shipping losses drop by half. By the end of 1917, the U-boat advantage is evaporating. Germany has traded global outrage for temporary hunger relief, and lost both. The scholarly debate still circles around this moment. Was the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare Germany's greatest blunder? Some historians call it suicidal, an act of desperation that guaranteed American entry. Others argue that the blockade left no choice, that any empire with its people starving would have done the same. The truth feels simpler. It was both brilliant and catastrophic, like setting fire to your own house to stay warm. At home, the propaganda doubles down. The government insists the blockade will soon break, that Britain is weeks from collapse. Children draw submarines in school, their teachers praising the undersea heroes. But behind closed doors, even the admirals whisper that the tide has turned. You visit a shipyard in Hamburg and watch workers weld a new submarine hull together. Sparks fly, hammers clang, but the mood is grim. One welder tells you, "They say we are making victory." Feels more like coffins. Another quirky detail. To save metal, the Germans began recycling church bells, literally melting down their faith to feed the war. Across the countryside, steeples stood naked, their silence tolling louder than any sermon. By autumn, the losses are undeniable. Every U-boat sunk means 40 men gone, 40 trained specialists Germany can't replace. The sea, once a symbol of power, becomes a grave. You spend a night in a sailor's tavern near Wilhelmshaven. The room smells of beer and despair. 2 officers argue quietly. One says the war can still be won by courage, the other just stares into his glass. A piano player starts a song, a waltz that drifts between major and minor keys, never quite deciding which. It's beautiful and broken, like the Empire itself. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American troops are already boarding ships. You picture them. Young, confident, clean uniforms, unscarred faces. They're coming fast, and the U-boats can't sink enough of them to matter. The math no longer favours Germany. One night you stand on the pier watching the black waves roll toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, a U-boat slips beneath the surface for another patrol, its captain pretending he still believes in the mission. The moonlight glints on the water, and for a moment you can't tell if you're looking at the sea or a mirror. Both are empty, both endless. The Empire has gambled its last card on the deep, and the deep has begun to collect its debt. You're standing on a cracked railway platform somewhere in Vienna when you first notice it. The silence between trains. It's 1917, and for Germany, the war has become a family tragedy playing out across an empire-shaped dining table. Its allies are crumbling one by one, each with a hand out begging for food, shells, or mercy. The Central Powers, once a swaggering club of ambition, are now 4 exhausted nations pretending to still be friends. Start with Austria-Hungary, Germany's awkward twin. The old empire looks like a map drawn by a child. Czechs, Slovaks, Hungarians, Poles, Croats, Serbs, all stitched together under one creaking crown. You can hear the seams popping. In Vienna, breadlines snake around the Hofburg Palace, while officers in glittering uniforms still waltz through the ballroom, pretending the empire hasn't already died. You sit in a cafe off the Kärntnerstrasse. The chandelier crystals are dusty, the sugar bowl's empty. 2 old officers sip watered-down coffee and murmur about the German brothers to the north. One says, "They'll save us yet." The other shakes his head. They're saving themselves first. The string quartet plays too loudly, as if volume can hide despair. Historical fact. By 1917, Austria-Hungary's army had suffered more than 6 million casualties. Half its soldiers were dead, wounded, or prisoners. Morale was a myth. Mutinies flared along the Italian front. Entire regiments surrendered without firing a shot. You head south to the Isonzo River Valley, where the Austrians and Italians have been hammering each other for 2 years. The landscape looks biblical. Rivers of mud, cliffs chewed by shells, soldiers who look older than their fathers. When the Germans arrive to help at Caporetto in October 1917, the Italians barely see them coming. Using stormtrooper tactics, small, fast, ruthless units, Germany helps shatter the Italian lines in days. It's a triumph on paper, another miracle for the headlines, but it's borrowed glory. Austria needed Germany to hold its hand. Quirky fact. When the German troops reached Italian positions at Caporetto, they found stockpiles of wine and pasta. The soldiers joked that the war had finally been worth it. For a few days, the front smelled like garlic instead of gunpowder. The victory is fleeting. Italy regroups, Britain and France rush reinforcements, and the front stabilizes again. Another, final victory that isn't. You ride a troop train back through Austria and see the hollow faces pressed to the windows, boys from Galicia, old men from Bohemia, all wearing the same grey and all muttering in different languages. Empires that large die from confusion as much as defeat. Next, you drift east to see the Ottoman Empire, Germany's other ally, if that's the right word. Once a mighty power stretching across 3 continents, now it's a patchwork quilt of deserts and broken railways. Its soldiers fight bravely in Palestine and Mesopotamia, but the British, armed with better maps and motorcars, keep cutting the quilt apart. You catch a train through Anatolia, and the car is full of flies, the windows cracked. An officer tells you, "We're fighting the sand more than the English." In the Arabian deserts, another battle brews. You watch tribesmen on horseback, led by a British officer in flowing white robes, T.E. Lawrence, blowing up Ottoman railways and melting into the dunes. The empire's veins are being cut, one sabotage at a time. Historical fact. By 1918, Ottoman control in the Middle East had collapsed. Damascus, Jerusalem, Baghdad, all lost. Germany keeps sending advisors, but advice can't patch a dying body. Then there's Bulgaria, the smallest, hungriest of the Central Powers, its army starved and worn to ribbons by endless Balkan warfare. You walk through Sofia and see soldiers without boots, beggars in uniform. In taverns, people whisper that they've been fighting for other nations' wars. When the food riots start, they don't even surprise anyone. By the autumn of 1918, Bulgaria becomes the first ally to surrender. You can feel the dominoes tipping west. In Berlin, the news from each front hits like hammer blows. Ministers call emergency meetings. Generals glare at maps that have stopped making sense. Ludendorff pounds his fist on a table and yells, "We must hold together!" But what's left to hold? The scholarly debate. Could Germany ever have survived its allies' collapses? Some historians argue that Austria-Hungary's disintegration doomed Germany automatically. The moment Vienna fell apart, the war became unwinnable. Others suggest Germany's leadership might have sought peace earlier, cut its losses, preserved something. Instead, pride ruled. You can see it on every general's face. They'd rather go down in flames than sign a surrender while still breathing. Meanwhile, the alliances themselves are starting to look like shackles. Germany props up Austria, feeds Turkey, supplies Bulgaria, all while its own people boil turnips for soup. The empire is eating its friends to stay alive. Quirky footnote. When the Kaiser received a desperate cable from Vienna begging for more coal, he scrawled on the margin, "If they need warmth, let them dance." Whether it was sarcasm or madness, no one knows. Back on the front, the men sense what the governments won't say. You hear it in the way they talk, short and quiet. The Austrians are finished. The Turks can't last. Maybe it's time to stop. But stopping isn't an order anyone's brave enough to give. You travel again to Vienna just before winter. Snow falls over the Ringstrasse, muffling the sound of wheels on cobblestones. People huddle in doorways, the bakeries are empty. Someone scrawled graffiti on a wall. Der Krieg frisst seine Kinder. The war devours its children. By now, Germany's victory feels like an echo shouted into a collapsing hall. The allies it once leaned on are now corpses propped up for photos. The Empire can't quite admit it yet, but you can feel the weight shifting, the inevitable slide from power to desperation. A train whistle sounds, shrill and lonely, another car full of wounded heads north, and you follow it with your eyes until it disappears into the snow. Behind you, church bells ring faintly, not for worship but for funerals. You think about all those treaties, all those signatures promising unity and triumph. They lie scattered now, meaningless ink on fading paper. The Central Powers are still technically united, but only in the way a sinking ship's passengers are united by the fact that none of them can swim fast enough. It's spring 1917, and you're back in Germany, but it doesn't look like the empire you remember. The streets of Berlin feel brittle, every sound sharper than it should be. There are no parades, no brass bands, no young men waving flags, only the shuffle of ration lines, the hollow scrape of empty pots, and the murmurs that no one dares to speak too loudly. Something beneath the surface is shifting. You walk through Alexanderplatz, past posters that still promise Sieg, victory, but they're sun-faded now, curling at the corners. Mothers queue for turnip soup. Soldiers home on leave stare at the ground rather than salute the posters. The war has stopped being a story people tell. It's just weather now, constant, grey, unavoidable. Historical fact. By 1917, Germany's civilian population had lost nearly 1 million people to hunger and disease caused by the British blockade. The infant mortality rate doubled. In some cities, the death rate of the elderly tripled. The army still fought, but the nation was slowly starving itself to death. Factories run day and night, but even that rhythm has turned hollow. Women and teenagers fill the munitions plants, their faces coated in yellow dust from TNT. They joke darkly that they're becoming canaries. Accidents are common, sometimes spectacular. When a shell plant in Spandau explodes, the shockwave breaks windows across the city. The workers' strikes begin small, just murmurs at first. Demands for better pay, shorter hours, actual food. The government calls them agitators, Bolshevik agents. But you can tell these people aren't revolutionaries. They're just tired. You overhear one woman say to another, "They tell us to hold on." But to what? The Kaiser's government, still clinging to the illusion of order, cracks down hard. The police patrol the factories, military tribunals threaten imprisonment. But the words strike and mutiny are starting to mingle, and once they do, no amount of punishment can silence them. The quirky fact: during one of these strikes, a Berlin newspaper accidentally printed an empty column where a censored article should have been. Instead of calming people, the blank space became a rallying symbol. Readers scrawled their own slogans into it. Peace now. Down with hunger. No more war. Even silence became rebellion. The unrest spreads to the ports. Hamburg, Bremen, Kiel. Sailors grumble about rotten food and officers who live well while the lower decks starve. One sailor writes in his journal, "We are told to die for the fatherland, but the fatherland does not eat turnips." Historians still argue when Germany's revolutionary moment really began. Some say 1917, others the mutinies of 1918. But you can feel it here, this early rumbling. The empire is still standing, but it's listing, and everyone aboard can feel the tilt. In July 1917, Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg is forced to resign. The generals, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, have effectively taken over. It's the birth of what one historian later calls the silent dictatorship. The military runs everything now: politics, production, propaganda. Civil government is a costume everyone's too afraid to take off. You attend a session of the Reichstag. The deputies speak in circles, their words brittle as dry twigs. One shouts, "Peace without annexations." Another retorts, "Peace without victory is surrender." The chamber erupts, but the debate means nothing. The real decisions are already being made by men in uniform hundreds of miles away. Back in the streets, people start whispering about Russia. The Tsar is gone, the Bolsheviks are rising. Workers there have toppled an empire, and suddenly, the unthinkable doesn't seem so impossible. The word revolution hangs in the air like a storm cloud. In August, a pamphlet begins circulating in Berlin titled "The War and the Working Class." It blames the ruling elites for the misery, calls for peace, hints at something larger: change. The authorities seize copies, arrest printers, but the words keep spreading like a secret song. Quirky fact: some of the pamphlets were printed on the backs of old theatre posters. People later joked that it was Germany's most honest double feature: comedy on one side, revolution on the other. And yet, amid all this tension, the war machine still grinds on. Soldiers return to the front, their faces pale, their hands trembling from hunger. You see trains packed with men too thin for their uniforms, and you realise the front and the home front are no longer separate worlds. They're two halves of the same dying organism. One evening you follow a column of wounded men limping through the streets. They've come home for good this time, but the crowd barely looks up. There are no flowers, no speeches. just the sound of boots on cobblestone. Someone spits and mutters, "They said it would be over by Christmas." The scholarly debate: could Germany have negotiated peace in 1917? Some argue yes. The Allies might have accepted a moderate deal before America's army arrived. Others say no. The generals and the Kaiser were too blinded by pride, too terrified of humiliation. You stand in the half-light of Berlin's dusk and realise the question is academic. No one here could imagine surrender while the guns still fired, even if those guns were aimed at ghosts. You pass a church, its steeple stripped of its bell for the war effort. Inside, the pews are half empty. The priest preaches endurance, but his voice trembles. Afterward he sits alone, staring at a loaf of bread so thin it looks transparent. Then comes the first open riot, January 1918, sparked by strikes in Berlin's munitions factories. You can hear it echo across the city. Chants, shouts, then gunfire. The government blames Bolsheviks again. But these are Berliners, workers, widows, soldiers home from the front. They don't want Marx or Lenin, they just want it to end. In the smoke and shouting, you catch a fragment of graffiti scrawled on a wall. "Peace or we'll take it ourselves." You linger a moment watching the soldiers arrive to restore order, their bayonets gleaming, and you know they can't kill what's already dying. The Kaiser's empire isn't falling to an enemy, it's falling to exhaustion. The wallpaper in the Imperial Palace is still gold, but the air smells like fear. It's October 1918, and you're standing in the Kaiser's war room in Spa, Belgium, where the last shreds of the German Empire are being held together by maps and denial. Outside, rain lashes the windows. Inside, generals argue over what victory even means anymore. Kaiser Wilhelm II looks older now, stooped, eyes dull, moustache trembling. Once he dreamed of empire and destiny, now he dreams of escape. Every telegram brings more bad news. Bulgaria has surrendered, the Ottoman front is collapsing, Austria-Hungary is disintegrating. The walls are closing in, but the generals pretend it's just weather. Ludendorff, pacing like a caged wolf, slams his fist onto the table. "We must hold the line," he shouts. "The front is not broken." But everyone in the room knows it is. Allied tanks and fresh American troops are carving through the Western Front, pushing the exhausted German army back yard by yard. Historical fact: between August and November 1918, the Allies' 100 Days Offensive recaptured all of the territory Germany had taken since 1914. The German army lost nearly 1 million men, killed, captured, or missing. It wasn't a retreat anymore, it was a collapse. You travel to the front lines near Cambrai. The trenches that once seemed immovable are now filled with chaos. Retreating units, shattered equipment, field kitchens abandoned mid-meal. The soldiers' faces are ghostly, their uniforms tattered. They talk openly of defeat, a word that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "We're fighting for ghosts," one mutters, staring into the mud. Behind them, new weapons hum overhead. British tanks, sleek, relentless beasts, grind through barbed wire like paper. Allied airplanes swarm the skies. The German artillery fires sporadically, often with too few shells to matter. You can taste the desperation in the air. And yet, even as the army crumbles, the high command keeps feeding it orders. The officers bark commands about honour and discipline, but you can hear the hollow echo in their voices. They're talking to keep the silence away. Back in Berlin, that silence has already broken. Riots spread faster than censors can hide them. Strikes cripple factories. Railway workers refuse to move troop trains. The Empire's machinery is seizing up from within. You're at the Brandenburg Gate when word spreads that sailors at Kiel have mutinied. They were ordered to sail for one last suicidal attack against the British fleet. An act of honour, they were told. Instead, they raised red flags, disobeyed, and took over the port. You can almost hear the cheer ripple through the city. For the first time, the war's rebellion isn't whispered, it's shouted. Quirky fact: the mutineers in Kiel formed their own Soldiers and Workers' Council, modelled after the Soviets in Russia. Within a week, similar councils appear in Hamburg, Bremen, Munich, and Berlin. The revolution isn't an explosion, it's a chain reaction. At Spa, Ludendorff rants about betrayal. "The home front has stabbed us in the back," he howls, pounding his chest. The irony drips thicker than the rain outside. It was the generals who promised miracles, the leaders who gambled with starvation and called it strategy. But admitting that would mean admitting the entire empire was built on pride. The scholarly debate still swirls. Was Germany truly defeated on the battlefield, or did it crumble from within? Some historians argue the army could have held longer, if not for the strikes and mutinies. Others counter that the soldiers themselves were the rebellion. The same men, starving and abandoned, who'd simply had enough. You stand in the mud at Cambrai and realise there's no difference anymore between front and home. It's all one long retreat. You ride a train from the front toward Cologne. The windows are cracked. The air smells of coal and mildew. A corporal reads aloud from a leaflet. Peace negotiations underway. Wilson's 14 points. The men murmur, half hope, half disbelief. One says, "If it's peace, I'll take it." Even from the devil, another laughs softly. "You'll get it from worse." In Berlin, revolution spreads like wildfire. Workers march under red banners, demanding an end to the monarchy. Crowds storm police stations. Soldiers join them instead of shooting. The word Kaiser becomes a curse. Wilhelm flees to the Netherlands, slipping across the border in a plain grey coat. He leaves behind not just his throne, but an empire that no longer believes in anything. Historical fact. On November 9th, 1918, the German Republic was proclaimed from a balcony in Berlin, even before the Kaiser's abdication was officially signed. It wasn't a transition, it was a coup of exhaustion. You're in the crowd when the announcement is made. People cheer, cry, throw hats in the air, but the sound is hollow. There's no real triumph here, just relief that something, anything, has changed. A young man next to you says, "So, it's over," and no one answers. 2 days later, in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne, Germany signs the armistice. The generals, pale and stiff, stare at the document as if it's written in another language. Maybe it is. The clause that matters most is simple. The fighting will cease at 11 a.m. You stand in a field near the Meuse that morning. At 10:59 the guns are still firing. At 11 o'clock they stop. The silence is deafening. Men on both sides lift their heads above the parapets, blinking into a world that suddenly feels too bright. Quirky fact, some soldiers refuse to cheer. One German officer simply wrote in his diary, "Home now." For what? The empire that dreamed of a place in the sun ends not with fire, but with a sigh. The Kaiser's banners are gone, the streets are grey, and the people who survived are too tired to celebrate. You walk back through Berlin that night. The crowds are dispersing, the flags folded, the songs fading. Somewhere a child asks his mother, "Who won?" She hesitates, then says, "No one." The revolution hasn't finished yet, it's only beginning. But for the first time in 4 years the guns are silent. The war that was supposed to make Germany great has left it unrecognisable. And in that stillness, as snow begins to fall over the ruined city, you realise sometimes the loudest defeat is the one that ends in silence. The calendar has finally crawled to 1918's end, but Germany's war doesn't stop with the guns. You're walking through the Rhineland in December, where the mud hasn't dried and the soldiers coming home don't look victorious. They look lost. The army hasn't been defeated, not officially, not in the way soldiers are supposed to be. They're still armed, still marching in formation, but the flag they march under doesn't belong to an empire anymore. You pass a group of them trudging along the roadside. Their boots slap the frost, their faces expressionless. "Back to Berlin," one mutters, "if it's still there." Another answers, "At least the shells stopped." Their laughter dies before it reaches the air. They've survived, technically. Historical fact. After the armistice of November 11th, 1918, roughly 6 million German soldiers began to demobilise. They marched home not to fanfare but to suspicion. Civilians stared at them like ghosts. The new German Republic called them heroes. The people called them hungry. The home front isn't ready for them. Barracks are full, rail lines jammed, ration cards nearly worthless. You watch a soldier trade his Iron Cross for a loaf of bread in a Hamburg market. "Medals don't taste good," the seller jokes weakly. It doesn't get a laugh. The army's leaders, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, have already resigned or fled. The so-called People's Government in Berlin is trying to invent democracy from scratch, while the empire's ruins are still smoking. You stand in the Reichstag and watch as Friedrich Ebert, the new chancellor, insists, "Germany is now a republic of the people." He looks terrified as he says it. Outside, the streets are crawling with new uniforms, red armbands of socialist militias, green-grey coats of loyal army units, black caps of anarchists. Every group thinks it's the real Germany. Every one of them carries a gun. You move through the city and the air tastes of revolution, smoke, fear and printing ink. Handbills flutter everywhere. Peace, freedom, bread, workers, arm yourselves, down with the generals. The slogans clash, overlap, contradict. No one knows who's in charge anymore, least of all the government. Quirky fact, in the first month of the Weimar Republic's existence, Germany had more than 40 different political newspapers in Berlin alone, each claiming to speak for the true people. By spring, half were banned or burned. Out in the countryside, soldiers and farmers form councils, Räte, inspired by the Russian Soviets. They confiscate land, seize food stores, write their own decrees. Some dream of a socialist utopia, others just want to make sure their families eat. The army sends patrols to restore order, but the soldiers sent to stop them often join instead. The scholarly debate. Was Germany's revolution ever real, or just chaos wearing red flags? Some historians call it a missed revolution, too disorganised to overthrow the elites completely, too powerful to be ignored. Others say it was doomed from the start, crushed between the old generals and the new fear of Bolshevism. Either way, you can feel the fragility in the air. In January 1919, it all boils over. You're there when the Spartacists rise in Berlin, led by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, idealists who believe Germany can follow Russia's path. Barricades spring up in the streets, machine guns rattle, government troops, the Freikorps, march in with iron crosses still pinned to their coats. The fighting is brutal, confused. You see civilians crouching in doorways, stray bullets cracking windows. After a week, it's over. Luxemburg and Liebknecht are captured, beaten and shot. Their bodies are thrown into a canal. The river carries them away, and with them Germany's brief experiment in radical hope. You stand on the canal bridge a few days later, the water still flecked with ice. A man beside you mutters, "We've killed the dreamers. Now who will dream for us?" Quirky detail. Within weeks, the Freikorps, those volunteer militias of ex-soldiers, start painting skulls on their helmets, calling themselves Guardians of Order. Many of these same men, hardened and disillusioned, will resurface in darker uniforms in another generation. History doesn't end, it mutates. Meanwhile, Allied troops cross into Germany to enforce the armistice terms. French soldiers march through the Rhineland towns. American columns patrol along the Moselle. The sight of occupation burns worse than hunger. "We were not beaten," one veteran grumbles. "We were betrayed." The phrase catches fire. You can almost watch it spread. Die Dolchstoßlegende, the stab in the back. The myth that the German army was undefeated in the field but sabotaged by traitors at home. Jews, socialists, liberals, pacifists, anyone convenient to blame. It's a lie born from humiliation, but lies are lighter to carry than guilt. Historical fact. Hindenburg himself, the same man who had begged for peace in October, told a parliamentary inquiry in 1919 that the army was stabbed in the back by the home front. It became gospel overnight. In taverns, people repeat it between sips of watery beer. We could have won, they say, if not for the cowards. It doesn't matter that they've all seen the defeat with their own eyes. Denial is the only thing left that fills the stomach. You visit a veterans' hostel in Munich, a building that smells of cheap soup and cigarette ash. Men sleep on straw mats, coughing, arguing over whose fault it was. One writes in a notebook, "They promised a better world. I will build it myself." You glance at his name tag, Corporal Hitler, and shiver at the foreshadowing. The scholarly debate about the stab in the back myth still rages decades later. Was it deliberate propaganda, or just collective trauma looking for a villain? Most agree it was both. It became the story Germany told itself to make defeat bearable, and in doing so made the next war inevitable. You walk through a train station one evening, watching soldiers scatter into the crowd, some limping, some weeping, some simply vanishing. Above them, a sign reads, "Homecoming for Heroes." But nobody's cheering. The only sound is boots on tile and the faint murmur of a nation trying to rewrite what just happened. Outside, snow drifts through the lamplight, soft and slow. The guns have been silent for weeks, but the war still hums beneath everything. The hunger, the resentment, the silence between neighbours. Germany isn't losing anymore, but it isn't winning either. It's just waiting, and waiting is its own kind of war. You're sitting at a long wooden table in a railway carriage deep in the forest of Compiègne, the same one where the armistice was signed. The ink has dried, the signatures set, but the paper still trembles under the weight of what comes next. It's early 1919, and Germany's delegation is being summoned to Paris. The war is over, but the reckoning is only beginning. Paris doesn't smell like victory. It smells like smoke, sweat, and arguments. You can hear them even from the streets outside the Tuileries, French voices demanding vengeance, British ones asking for balance, Americans talking about ideals. The world's most powerful men are drawing borders with pens that leak blood. Inside the mirrored halls of Versailles, chandeliers gleam above tables strewn with maps. You can see them clearly, the Big Four, Wilson, Clemenceau, Lloyd George, and Orlando. Germany isn't invited to these discussions yet. It's like watching surgeons debate the autopsy before the patients even arrived. Historical fact, the Treaty of Versailles negotiations lasted 6 months, from January to June 1919, and Germany was excluded from the talks until the final stage. When the terms were presented, they weren't negotiable. The German delegation, led by Count Brockdorff-Rantzau, arrives looking pale and resigned. They've been told this will be a piece of justice. What they get feels more like a sentencing. The Allies hand them a document 200 pages long. It demands that Germany accept full responsibility for the war, pay enormous reparations, surrender territory, colonies, ships, and pride. Brockdorff-Rantzau stands, trembling slightly, and says, "We are ready to admit that our enemies won the war. To admit that Germany alone is guilty of its outbreak would be a lie." The hall stays silent. Clemenceau, the French tiger, replies coldly, "You're here to sign, not to speak." You feel the temperature drop. Here's the hard historical fact. Article 231 of the treaty, the War Guilt Clause, forced Germany to accept total responsibility for all loss and damage caused by the war. It wasn't just a legal point. It was humiliation codified in ink. The reparations bill is staggering. 132 billion gold marks, equivalent to hundreds of billions in today's money. You can practically hear the German economy wheeze. The Rhine is to be demilitarized, the Saar's coal mines handed to France, the army cut to 100,000 men. No tanks, no air force, no submarines. A once mighty power reduced to paperwork. Outside the palace, French civilians gather to cheer. In Berlin, people wait in stunned silence. When the news arrives, the anger is volcanic. Newspapers print the treaty terms with black mourning borders. Crowds chant, "Better hunger than shame." But hunger they already know. Shame is new and it burns. Quirky fact. When German Foreign Minister Hermann Müller finally signed the treaty on June 28, 1919, the pen used was the same kind as the one used for the armistice. Some said it was coincidence. Others called it poetic cruelty. You wander through the German delegation's quarters that evening. The men sit in silence, staring at their boots, as if words might bring back the empire. One whispers, "This peace will not last 20 years. You'll find out later he's almost right." Scholarly debate over Versailles never stops. Some argue it was too harsh, a Carthaginian peace that sowed the seeds for another war. Others claim it wasn't harsh enough, that Germany remained strong enough to rise again. But in the faces of ordinary people you see a simpler truth. Humiliation has a half-life longer than any treaty. Back in Germany, protests erupt. The new Weimar government, only months old, is caught between fury and starvation. "Sign," say the generals, or the Allies will invade. "Don't sign," say the crowds, and die standing. The government signs. The ink hits the paper, and with it the last illusions of control fade. The Republic is born out of defeat, and everyone knows it. November criminals, the nationalists sneer. Those who signed the armistice, those who signed the treaty, anyone who tried to make peace. The phrase becomes a weapon sharper than any bayonet. You walk through Berlin's Tiergarten that summer. Children play with sticks pretending they're rifles. Their parents sit on benches reading newspapers filled with rage. One man spits on a headline that reads "Peace signed." "Peace," he says, "is just war with new rules." Factories stand idle. Inflation creeps like mould. Soldiers' pensions vanish into worthless marks. The Allies occupy the Rhineland, and every French flag fluttering over German soil feels like another slap. And then there's the psychological wound. You visit a veterans' hospital, one of many. Men missing limbs, eyes, futures. On the walls hang photographs of the Kaiser and the new president side by side, a cruel joke of continuity. One nurse tells you, they wake screaming, but not from pain, from memory. Quirky footnote, to meet reparations demands, Germany printed commemorative coins made from melted artillery shells. The inscription read, "The enemy leaves us nothing but honour." By the time they circulated, even honour felt counterfeit. In cafes, you overhear the same conversation over and over. "We didn't lose," someone insists. "We were betrayed." It's the stab-in-the-back myth mutating again, now feeding on Versailles itself. You can feel it building, anger looking for a uniform to wear. Wilson returns to America calling the treaty a triumph of peace. Clemenceau calls it justice. Lloyd George calls it the best we could get. The Germans call it something else entirely. A diktat. A dictated peace. You walk once more through the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, now silent after the signing. The light glints off the chandeliers, and you realise something chilling. 48 years earlier, in this exact room, the German Empire was proclaimed after France's defeat in 1871. The circle has closed. Empires rise here, and they fall here. Outside, the world is celebrating peace. Inside, you can already hear the next war breathing. You're sitting in a smoky Berlin beer hall in the summer of 1919, a newspaper spread across the table between your elbows. The headline screams, "The Shame of Versailles." A man at the next table spits on the page and mutters, "They betrayed us." It's not the first time you've heard it, and it won't be the last. The ink isn't even dry on the peace treaty, and already Germany is writing itself a new story. The story of the Dolchstoßlegende, the stab in the back. It starts as a whisper among officers, then becomes a sermon. The army was undefeated, they insist. It was the home front that collapsed. The socialists, the Jews, the cowards, they stabbed us while we held the line. The myth gives meaning to defeat, makes humiliation feel noble, and in a nation starving for dignity it spreads like fire. You walk past the ruins of old recruiting offices now plastered with new posters. One shows a soldier kneeling with a knife in his back, the blade labelled Revolution. The caption reads, "Never again." Children stop and stare. Propaganda has become therapy, and hate is its anaesthetic. Historical fact. The stab-in-the-back myth didn't come from street agitators, it came from the top. In November 1919, General Hindenburg testified before the Reichstag's Committee of Inquiry. Asked how the war was lost, he replied coolly, "The German army was stabbed in the back by the home front." His words became gospel overnight. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief. The story is simple, comforting. We didn't lose. We were betrayed. Complexity dies the way truth usually does, in service to pride. The Weimar Republic, still wobbling on baby legs, tries to shout the truth over the noise. The Social Democrats insist the army was exhausted, the nation bled dry, the war unwinnable. But logic doesn't compete with myth. Not in a country this humiliated. You wander into a veterans' meeting hall, the kind where men gather to smoke and remember. They call themselves the Stahlhelm, the Steel Helmet League, part fraternity, part militia. The air is thick with tobacco and nostalgia. A man with a scarred cheek stands to speak. They said we were beaten. Look around you. Are these the faces of defeat? Cheers follow, mugs slam. You can feel the electricity of shared resentment, the dark comfort of belonging to a lie. Quirky fact. The Stahlhelm published calendars featuring scenes of brave German soldiers standing tall, while ghostly figures of politicians, thin, rat-faced caricatures, loom behind them with knives. They sold out within days. Germans weren't just buying paper, they were buying absolution. The myth grows because it fills the vacuum left by the empire's collapse. The monarchy is gone, the churches have gone quiet, and the new democracy feels weak and foreign. But the army still stands tall in the imagination. The legend says it was perfect, betrayed only by internal enemies. It's like watching a country polish a gravestone while pretending the body isn't underneath. You pass by a rally in Munich's Theresienwiese. Veterans, students and angry shopkeepers shout slogans against the November criminals. The speaker's voice cuts through the crowd. They stabbed us once. They will not stab us again. The people cheer, fists raised. You notice a young ex-corporal in the front row, face upturned, eyes burning. Adolf Hitler. He listens, not yet speaking, but you can see the myth feeding him like oxygen. The scholarly debate later will dissect this legend from every angle. Was it cynically crafted propaganda by the military elite to escape blame, or a spontaneous national delusion born of trauma? Most historians say both. The myth offered a way to dodge responsibility, but it also gave voice to genuine pain, the pain of millions who'd sacrificed everything for nothing. You ride a tram through Berlin. The passengers whisper about traitors and Bolsheviks. A woman says her husband's regiment never lost a battle. A man replies that it was the Jews in government who sold them out. You can feel the poison working, slow, invisible, effective. The stab in the back isn't just a myth, it's a map pointing Germany toward its next catastrophe. Quirky little detail, school textbooks in the early 1920s began to echo the legend subtly. Phrases like, Germany was defeated not by arms but by disunity, crept into the margins. The next generation was already being taught to mistrust democracy as weakness. Meanwhile, the real Germany, the Weimar Germany, staggers forward. Parliament argues over reparations, inflation creeps, strikes paralyse cities. But whenever things get bad, people look backward instead of forward. The myth gives them someone to blame, and blame is easier than rebuilding. One night you sit in a cafe near the Brandenburg Gate. A war widow pours herself a glass of cheap schnapps, muttering, "They said he died for nothing. I say he died betrayed." Another man nods. They'll pay for it someday. He doesn't say who they are. He doesn't have to. Everyone knows. Historians like to talk about collective memory. But what Germany builds after 1919 isn't memory. It's amnesia by choice. Every lie that comforts becomes a cornerstone for something darker. You can feel the country tightening around its own illusion, the way a wound closes around shrapnel. Outside, rain slicks the cobblestones, reflecting the gaslights like knives. The city looks clean from a distance, but up close you can see the cracks. In beer halls, men tell each other that the next war will be different. In classrooms, teachers murmur that Germany deserves her rightful place. In newspapers, writers talk of renewal, purification, revenge. You stand on a bridge over the Spree, the river dark beneath you, and think about how myths never really die. They just wait for the right voice to give them a uniform. For now, Germany tells itself that it didn't lose, it was betrayed. And as you listen to the echo of that story bouncing from one ruined heart to another, you understand something chilling. Losing a war breaks nations, but refusing to admit it builds monsters. The ink on the Treaty of Versailles has barely dried, yet the world already feels like it's decomposing. You're walking down Unter den Linden on a grey afternoon in 1921, and the air hums with the low anxiety of a nation waiting for another blow. Posters scream about reparations, unemployment, betrayal. The faces around you are gaunt and tight, the faces of people who've been told to tighten their belts until they vanish. Berlin smells of coal smoke and hopelessness. You pass a baker's shop where loaves sit behind glass like museum pieces, priced in numbers that climb daily. The sign in the window reads, Heute Brot, 3 Mark, morgen mehr, today bread, 3 marks, tomorrow, more. The owner doesn't even bother changing it anymore. Historical fact. By 1923, the German mark had collapsed entirely. Hyperinflation reduced savings to dust. At its peak, a loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Families carted cash in wheelbarrows and burned banknotes for warmth because firewood was more expensive. You wander through the streets with a handful of money that feels lighter by the hour. Children make kites from worthless bills. A housewife pays for eggs with a stack of notes thicker than her wrist. Somewhere, a man stands outside a pawnshop shouting, "Today's prices, tomorrow they're trash." The Weimar Republic, born in chaos, now flails in arithmetic. Reparations payments crush the economy, and every attempt to print more money only feeds the beast. The government insists it's temporary. The people stop believing. Quirky fact. One enterprising Berlin printer began making wallpaper, printed with repeating patterns of banknotes. It was cheaper than actual wallpaper. Guests at dinner parties like to peel off a strip or two as souvenirs. In the cafes, the talk is all numbers and rumours. The mark's down again. The French will invade the Ruhr. The Americans will save us. A war widow near the counter shakes her head and says, "I buried my husband for this?" Nobody answers. Then come the strikes, the protests, the new uprisings. Communists seize city halls in the name of equality. Right-wing militias march demanding revenge. The police pick sides depending on the day. Germany is a country in a constant argument with itself, and every voice sounds like thunder. In 1920, you watch the Kapp-Putsch unfold, a farcical right-wing coup attempt led by generals and bureaucrats who refuse to accept democracy. They march into Berlin with Freikorps units, those same disillusioned veterans from the war, and declare a national government. For a moment it looks like Weimar's brief life is over. But the workers strike, paralysing the city, and the coup collapses within days. Scholarly debate still lingers over what this moment meant. Some say it proved the resilience of democracy, that the people themselves saved the republic. Others point out that the generals who betrayed it were never punished, that the same pattern, threat, collapse, amnesia, would repeat until it destroyed the country completely. You step into a dimly lit beer hall one night, the kind that smells of stale hops and cheap cigarettes. On stage, a veteran with a booming voice rails against the politicians. "They starved you," he shouts. "They took your pride." The crowd roars. The speech is part sermon, part therapy. You've heard dozens like it, but the anger here feels sharper, more organised. A pamphlet makes its way around the tables. On the cover, an eagle clutching a swastika. The group is small, obscure, almost laughable. But you've seen what small lies can do when they find hungry ears. The November criminals narrative is still everywhere. If we hadn't signed, people mutter, the French would have surrendered by now. History has become fantasy, cheap, seductive, deadly. Quirky fact: during the worst of the inflation, theatre tickets were often cheaper than food, so Berliners packed the cabarets. Laughter became rebellion. Comedians joked about paying for beer with wheelbarrows of cash. One popular line, "I went out to buy a loaf of bread and came home a millionaire." Everyone laughed, but no one smiled. You visit the countryside, hoping for calm. Instead, you find rural towns choked with resentment. Farmers hoard grain rather than sell it for worthless currency. A priest in Bavaria tells you, "We used to pray for rain. Now we pray for the dollar." The occupying Allied forces, French, British, Belgian, patrol parts of the Rhineland. Their uniforms make every German heart burn a little hotter. You overhear a teacher telling his students, "Never forget this humiliation." The children nod solemnly, learning bitterness before arithmetic. Then comes the Ruhr crisis of 1923. France, tired of unpaid reparations, sends troops to seize Germany's industrial heart. The government responds with passive resistance, a national strike. Factories grind to a halt, workers go unpaid, and the printing presses roar again, spewing marks into oblivion. By the end of the year, the currency isn't worth the paper it's printed on. In Düsseldorf, you see a man selling cigars from a coffin. He says the wood's too expensive for funerals now. "We're all dying anyway," he laughs. "It's not a joke, it's resignation." The scholarly argument about Weimar's economy runs in circles. Some economists blame reparations, others blame the government's refusal to stabilise earlier. But as you watch the crowd storm banks to trade money that's already worthless, theory feels irrelevant. This isn't economics, it's collective panic. Amid the chaos, one slender ray of light appears. The Dawes Plan of 1924. America steps in, restructuring reparations and lending Germany money to pay its debts. A global pyramid scheme dressed as salvation. The economy breathes again, briefly. Berlin's lights flicker back on, jazz fills the air, and the newspapers call it the Golden Twenties. But you can feel how thin the optimism is, like ice over deep water. Quirky fact: the Weimar government issued a new currency, the Rentenmark, backed not by gold, but by land and industrial assets. It worked, miraculously. Within months, the mark stabilised. People called it the miracle money. But they never forgot that their old savings had evaporated overnight. You sit in a cafe, sipping bitter coffee, watching people smile again for the first time in years. Couples dance to American jazz, artists paint, writers argue. Berlin feels alive, decadent, defiant. But beneath it all, resentment still pulses, steady as a heartbeat. The empire's ghost hasn't gone away. It's just learned to wear modern clothes. Every toast to the new Germany carries a silent wish to be powerful again, respected again, feared again. And as you leave the cafe, the neon lights buzzing overhead, you realise something unsettling. The Weimar Republic isn't healing, it's dreaming, and the dreams are loud enough to drown out memory. You're walking along Berlin's Friedrichstrasse in 1925, and for once the city seems to have remembered what laughter sounds like. The cafes are full, the tramlines hum, and the smell of roasting chestnuts mixes with cigarette smoke and optimism. The papers call it Die Goldenen Zwanziger, the Golden Twenties, and everyone wants to believe in it. After years of hunger and humiliation, Germany feels alive again, if only on credit. In the dance halls, jazz bands imported from America play until dawn. The old march tunes have vanished, replaced by syncopation and saxophones. Women cut their hair short, wear bright dresses, drink champagne, and call themselves Neue Frauen, new women. Men in wide-brimmed hats quote Freud and joke about living fast before the next collapse. The Weimar Republic has discovered the cure for its trauma: distraction. Historical fact: between 1924 and 1929, thanks to American loans and the Dawes Plan, Germany's economy briefly stabilized. Industrial production surpassed pre-war levels. Berlin became the third largest city in the world, the capital of art, science, and vice. You drift through smoky cabarets where performers in sequined costumes sing about despair as if it's glamorous. When die Welt untergeht, tanzen wir noch. When the world ends, we'll still be dancing. The crowd roars with laughter, but it sounds brittle, like glass about to crack. At night, the city glows electric. Neon signs advertise everything from corsets to cigarettes. In the Kurfürstendamm, you spot Einstein hurrying to a lecture, Brecht scribbling lyrics in a notebook, and a young Marlene Dietrich rehearsing under the street lamps. Berlin is a carnival of genius and madness, a city trying to outpace its own ghosts. Quirky fact: to save money on light bulbs, some Berlin bars installed mirrored ceilings to reflect the glow of a single bulb. Patrons joked that the reflections were double the brightness, half the future. But beneath the glitter, the wounds of the war are still festering. The veterans' hospitals are full, though no one visits anymore. The government promises care, pensions, honour, but inflation has made those words cheap. Men with empty sleeves or missing faces sit on corners selling pencils from tin cups, while jazz plays around them. They're the punctuation marks of a sentence the country refuses to finish. You visit one such hospital on the outskirts of Charlottenburg. The walls are lined with photographs, soldiers before and after reconstructive surgery. Dr. Ferdinand Sauerbruch, the famous surgeon, moves between rooms like a priest of prosthetics. "We rebuild them," he tells you quietly, "but we cannot make them believe." The scholarly debate over Weimar's stability begins even before it ends. Was this a genuine recovery, or just an illusion? Economists point to rising wages, new housing, booming exports. Politicians praise democracy's resilience. But you can feel it. This is not peace, it's remission. Everyone's smiling because they're afraid to stop. The stab-in-the-back myth hasn't died. It's gone underground, fermenting in beer halls and veterans clubs. In Munich, a failed artist who once shouted about betrayal now spends his nights honing speeches and reorganising his followers. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, tiny, banned and mocked after a failed coup in 1923, is quietly being reborn. Historical fact: Adolf Hitler's beer hall putsch in 1923 had ended in disaster, with 16 Nazis dead and Hitler imprisoned. His trial, however, gave him a national platform, and his subsequent sentence, only 9 months in a comfortable cell, turned him into a martyr for the disaffected right. "There," he wrote Mein Kampf, blending personal grievance with national revenge. You pass a newsstand displaying cheap copies of his book. Nobody takes it seriously yet. "Just another rant from a bitter man," one reader laughs. The clerk shrugs. They always start that way. Quirky footnote: the original printings of Mein Kampf sold so poorly that the publisher considered pulping them, until Hitler became Chancellor a decade later. Then every married couple received one as a state wedding gift. Even propaganda has a sense of humour, just delayed. Back in Berlin, the Republic's government swings between hope and hysteria. Political parties splinter, cabinets rise and fall like stage scenery. The newspapers nickname the Reichstag the revolving door. Each crisis feels existential, but somehow the city keeps dancing. You walk through the Tiergarten one evening and overhear two men debating loudly. "Democracy," one says, laughing. "A fine experiment until people get hungry again." The other responds, "Then we'll eat the politicians." You can't tell if he's joking. Meanwhile, America's money keeps the illusion alive. Loans flow in, factories hum, wages rise. Germany buys peace on instalment. The scholars who study this era later call it the fragile miracle. You understand why? It's all scaffolding. Glittering, fragile scaffolding built over ruins. In the countryside, though, things are different. Farmers grumble about falling prices and foreign goods. Berlin parties, they say, while we drown in debt. The gap between the city's decadence and rural despair widens into a canyon. That canyon is where populism grows best. By 1928, the National Socialists win less than 3% of the vote. Nobody worries. The Communists too rally loudly but achieve little. The Weimar Republic looks stable on paper, but you've seen the cracks before. The same denial that preceded 1914, the same brittle pride dressed up as optimism. You sit at a cafe table as the jazz plays, watching a young woman twirl across the floor, cigarette holder in hand, laughing. For a moment you almost believe the illusion too. Maybe Germany has moved past its ghosts. Maybe history has decided to forgive. Then the band stops mid-song as someone bursts in waving a newspaper. Stock market crash in New York. The laughter falters. Glasses freeze mid-air. The pianist's hand hovers over the keys. The date is October 29th, 1929. Quirky fact. Within weeks of the crash, German factories began laying off workers by the tens of thousands. By 1932, 6 million would be unemployed. You watch the woman on the dance floor lower her cigarette slowly, her smile fading. Outside, the neon signs flicker, and for the first time in years, Berlin's electric heart seems to skip a beat. The music hasn't stopped yet, but you can already feel the silence waiting. It's the winter of 1930, and you're back on the same Berlin street that once pulsed with jazz and champagne. The lights still shine, but they're flickering now. Half the bulbs burned out, half the people gone. The Great Depression has arrived, and Germany, balanced on the edge of borrowed hope, is the first to fall. Factories shutter. Trains sit idle. You pass men lined up at soup kitchens in threadbare coats, their hands trembling not from the cold but from hunger. Children sit beside them, polishing shoes or selling newspapers with headlines that might as well all say the same thing. Unemployment rises again. Historical fact. By 1932, over 6 million Germans, nearly a third of the working population, were unemployed. In industrial cities like Essen and Dortmund, the jobless rate topped 50%. In Berlin, families sold furniture piece by piece to buy bread. You step into a tenement where 4 families share one stove. A woman stirs a pot of watery soup and says, "They promised peace, and now we have this." Her husband replies, "Peace doesn't pay rent." The room smells of cabbage and despair. The Weimar Republic, fragile even in prosperity, now buckles. The American loans vanish overnight. Banks collapse. The government's coalition splinters. Democracy, already fragile, starts to look like a luxury. At night the beer halls fill again, but the laughter is gone. Instead there are speeches, loud ones, angry ones. Men in brown shirts pound tables and shout about traitors, parasites, the thieves of the fatherland. You recognize the rhythm. This is the stab-in-the-back myth reborn, now with uniforms. Quirky fact. The brown dye for the Nazi stormtroopers' shirts was originally purchased as army surplus from a South American police contract. They wore them because they were cheap. History's monsters often start with clearance sales. You watch as Adolf Hitler takes the stage at a rally in Munich. The crowd is packed, faces flushed, eyes glassy. He doesn't speak so much as roar, hands slicing the air like blades. "They laughed at us," he bellows. "They humiliated us. But Germany will rise again." The audience erupts, not just in applause, but in relief. Finally, someone is telling them they were right all along. The scholarly debate about Hitler's rise is endless. Was it the economy, the resentment, the charisma, the myth? Most agree it was all of them at once, a perfect storm of pride and hunger. When people starve, they'll eat lies if they taste like hope. You travel to the Reichstag in 1930. Elections are underway, and the National Socialist German Workers' Party, once a fringe movement, is now the second largest in the country. Overnight, they've gone from punchline to prophecy. You can feel the panic among the old guard politicians. They call Hitler a fad, a demagogue, a temporary madness. You've heard that kind of confidence before, right before the guns began in 1914. Quirky detail. One newspaper editorial from the time described Hitler as a noisy clown who will soon exhaust himself. Less than 3 years later, that clown would rule Germany by decree. Meanwhile, street violence becomes a new language. The communists and the Nazis fight for the same hungry hearts, often, literally. Fistfights, brawls, assassinations. The police can't keep up. You walk through Alexanderplatz after a clash. Broken glass, blood on cobblestones, pamphlets fluttering like dead birds. One reads, "Only strong hands can save Germany." Another says, "Workers of the world unite." Both sound like promises. Both are traps. The Weimar government drifts into paralysis. Chancellors come and go like stage actors forgetting their lines. President Paul von Hindenburg, the aging war hero, looks more like a statue than a leader. He signs emergency decrees because Parliament can't agree on anything. Each decree is a small cut in democracy's skin. You sit in a cafe overhearing two men whisper, "The Nazis will restore order," one says. "At least they'll do something." The other replies, "They'll do everything." He doesn't mean it as a compliment. Outside, the stormtroopers march, rows upon rows of brown shirts moving like one body, their boots hammering rhythm into fear. Flags wave, drums beat, and for a moment, it almost looks like unity. But you've seen this kind of order before. It doesn't build nations, it consumes them. Historical fact, in July 1932 the Nazis won 37% of the vote, more than any other party. But they still lacked a majority, so Germany drifted on, rudderless, as the world watched. The Republic had been dying slowly for years. Now it was being strangled in daylight. You wander through a Berlin newspaper office. The editor, grey-faced and exhausted, points to the latest poll numbers. They want him, he says, not his politics. His certainty. Certainty sells better than truth. Quirky image. Desperate families began naming their newborn sons Adolf after 1930, believing it would bring luck or favour under the rising movement. Hope, it turns out, will wear any name if it promises survival. By 1932, the rallies grow larger. The flags, the songs, the salutes, all choreographed catharsis. Hitler no longer talks just about betrayal. He talks about destiny. "We will not kneel," he says, "to France, to Britain, to the bankers, to anyone." The crowd shouts it back, word for word, like scripture. But look closely at the faces. The veterans with empty sleeves, the young men with hollow eyes, the mothers with ration book hands. They aren't cheering for tyranny. They're cheering for something to fill the void. Scholarly debate calls this the failure of Weimar. But it's not failure, it's fatigue. Democracy takes patience. Resentment is faster. By January 1933, the backroom deals begin. Hindenburg, under pressure from conservative elites, appoints Hitler Chancellor, convinced they can control him. You've heard that line before in every Empire's last chapter. We can control the fire. The torchlight parades start that very night. Berlin glows again, not with the jazz of the golden 20s, but with the reflected flames of torches waving in perfect rhythm. The crowd chants, "Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer." You stand among them as the light flickers off faces, some smiling, some blank, all swept up in the collective heartbeat. It's mesmerizing. It's terrifying. The man who once blamed the loss of one war for everything now stands ready to start another. And you think back to that question whispered in 1918, as the Empire crumbled, who won? The answer has changed. The war didn't end, it just changed shape. It's January 30th, 1933, and the sky over Berlin is colourless, a blank slate waiting for history to start over. You're standing in front of the Chancellery as a small procession of cars pulls up. Inside the lead vehicle sits an unimpressive man in a dark coat and cheap hat, eyes hooded, moustache clipped like punctuation. His name you already know, Adolf Hitler, and by dusk he will be Chancellor of Germany. No one cheers loudly at first. It's cold and people are unsure what this means. By evening the uncertainty is gone. Thousands march by torchlight down Unter den Linden, brown shirts glinting, boots drumming, torches reflected in shop windows. The flames look like a second sunrise, but the light feels wrong, too red, too steady. Inside the Chancellery, President Hindenburg shakes the new Chancellor's hand. He's 85, half-deaf, and convinced this will stabilise the nation. "I have appointed Herr Hitler to save Germany," he mutters. Even his dog looks sceptical. Historical fact. Hitler's appointment on January 30th came not from revolution, but negotiation. Conservative elites, Franz von Papen chief among them, believed they could box him in, and harness his popularity while keeping power themselves. Within months, they'd learn what everyone who thinks they can control fire eventually learns. You walk down Wilhelmstrasse that night, the torch is still burning. A boy waves a flag half his size, his father salutes stiffly beside him. A woman in a shawl whispers, "Maybe he'll bring work." That's how it begins, not with ideology but with exhaustion. The next day, newspapers print the headline, "Hitler appointed Chancellor. National Unity Government formed." A few liberal editors grumble privately that this is the end of the Republic. Most just nod. Paper is expensive, ink is rationed, and hope is cheaper. Within weeks, the machinery starts humming. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels takes over the airwaves. Every radio broadcast now opens with "Germany awake." It sounds bright at first, like morning, until you realise the waking is permanent. No more sleep, no more dreaming. Quirky fact: to expand radio access, Goebbels introduced the Volksempfänger, a cheap people's receiver that could tune only to domestic stations. It made propaganda a household appliance. Families who once gathered around pianos now gathered around lies. In February 1933, you're woken by the smell of smoke. The Reichstag building is on fire, flames spearing the night. Hitler rushes to the scene in dramatic fury, shouting, "This is the beginning of the communist uprising!" One Dutch anarchist is arrested, but you can already see the script forming. By dawn, emergency decrees have suspended civil liberties for protection of the people and the state. Censorship, arrests, surveillance, legal overnight. Historical fact: the Reichstag fire decree of February 28th abolished freedom of speech, press and assembly. It remained the constitutional basis of Nazi rule until 1945. A week later, elections are held under intimidation. Stormtroopers patrol polling stations, opponents vanish, newspapers are silenced. The Nazis win 44%, still not a majority, but democracy doesn't need majorities to die, only enough people willing to trade freedom for certainty. Then, in March, comes the Enabling Act. You stand in the Kroll Opera House, where the Reichstag now meets, listening as deputies vote to give Hitler the power to rule by decree. Outside, SA men ring the building. Inside, the air is thick with fear. Only the Social Democrats vote no. One of them, Otto Wells, stands trembling and says, "Freedom and life can be taken from us, but not our honour." He sits. The act passes. Democracy ends to applause. Scholarly debate still wrestles with how quickly it happened. Was Germany doomed by its past, or did ordinary people simply stop looking when the lights went out? You watch those faces in the chamber, relieved, tired, convinced that order has finally returned, and realise it's both. By April, opponents crowd the prisons. By May, trade unions are banned. By June, rival parties dissolve themselves voluntarily. The word voluntary becomes a national joke that no one laughs at. Quirky note: when the Nazis banned labour unions, they replaced May Day, the workers' holiday, with National Labour Day, complete with parades and factory banners. The next morning, union leaders were arrested before breakfast. Efficiency had returned. Meanwhile, Germany's old wounds are cauterized with spectacle. Goebbels choreographs mass rallies like operas, floodlights slicing the sky, drums rolling like thunder. The crowds chant, "One people, one Reich, one Führer," until the words lose meaning and become heartbeat. Even the skeptical join in. It feels safer that way. You walk through a bookshop and watch as brown-shirted youths pile volumes onto the street. Freud, Mann, Marx, Heine, all degenerate. A university student tosses a book into the flames and shouts, "Against the un-German spirit." The crowd cheers. Fire has always been Germany's favourite form of punctuation. By summer, the first concentration camp, Dachau, opens outside Munich. Officially, it's for political re-education. Unofficially, it's a warning written in barbed wire. The newspapers call it discipline. No one calls it horror yet. Historical fact: by the end of 1933, more than 50,000 people had been imprisoned for political reasons. Many never saw trial. The scholarly debate about this moment is strangely human. Did people know what they were supporting? Some say yes. They saw the brutality and chose it. Others say no. They saw the pageantry and looked away. You suspect it's both again. Denial is just another form of consent. One evening you find yourself back at the Brandenburg Gate. It glows under floodlights, swastika banners hanging from its columns like curtains on a stage. A brass band plays Deutschland über alles. The torches flicker just as they did the night of his appointment, but now there are 10 times more of them. A mother lifts her child onto her shoulders, and the boy raises his tiny arm in salute. The crowd chants, Sieg Heil! It echoes off the stone until it sounds like one vast heartbeat. You remember the tired soldiers of 1918, trudging home through snow, whispering that they were betrayed. You remember the veterans' halls, the beer-stained speeches, the myths that replaced memory. This moment is what those lies were building toward all along. The empire that died in mud has been reborn in fire, and the man who promised to avenge the last war is already dreaming of the next. You look at the torches, the flags, the faces, and realise Germany hasn't learned why it lost the First World War. It has only learned how to lose differently, louder, faster, forever. You return to Berlin in 1934 and the city looks unrecognisable again. Cleaner, sharper, quieter. It's as if someone took the chaos of Weimar, scrubbed it with bleach, and polished the ruins until they gleamed. Flags flutter from every balcony, red fields and black swastikas like blood that's learned to smile. Everywhere you look, the past has been repainted to match the present. The trains run on time, the breadlines are gone, the newspapers all say the same thing and no one seems to mind. He has restored Germany, people whisper, as though speaking the words too loudly might break the spell, but the silence underneath hums like tension in a violin string. You walk through Alexanderplatz at noon and notice the difference. How no one speaks too freely, how laughter feels rehearsed. Freedom has been traded for certainty, and the exchange rate was heartbreakingly cheap. Historical fact, unemployment in Germany dropped from 6 million in 1932 to fewer than 1 million by 1936. Public works projects, highways, rearmament, and military industry revived the economy. The regime sold this as proof of its genius. Few questioned the cost because the jobs were real and hunger was gone. You watch workers paving a new autobahn outside Frankfurt. They sing patriotic songs between swings of their shovels. One man turns to you and grins. At least someone's giving us work, he says. Behind him a sign reads, One people, one Reich, one Führer. The words are as common now as air, and yet in the shadows the cleaning continues. Not of streets, but of people. Political opponents, journalists, Jews. Anyone who doesn't fit the mould of the new Germany simply disappears. Officially, they've moved, relocated, resigned. Unofficially, they're buried in statistics. Scholarly debate later calls this the illusion of normalization. Most Germans, historians argue, accepted the dictatorship not because they loved it, but because they were tired of chaos. They mistook silence for peace. You can see why. After years of shouting, the quiet almost feels like mercy. Then, in June 1934, the mask slips. You're in Munich when whispers spread. The Führer has turned on his own. The night of the long knives, they'll call it later. Hitler, fearing disloyalty among his paramilitary wing, the SA, orders a purge. Ernst Röhm, the man who once helped him rise, is arrested and shot. Along with him, hundreds more. Rivals, critics, even old allies. Quirky fact. Hitler personally signed a law after the massacre declaring all the killings legal acts of state self-defense. It was the moment he stopped pretending. The state no longer obeyed laws. The state was law. You stand near the parade grounds days later as crowds cheer his motorcade. The newspapers say the Führer has restored order. The people nod. Fear and gratitude have become indistinguishable emotions. By August 1934, Hindenburg dies. The last thread to the old empire finally snapped. Within hours, Hitler merges the offices of Chancellor and President, declaring himself Führer und Reichskanzler. The army swears a personal oath of loyalty to him, not to Germany. I swear by God this sacred oath, that I will render unconditional obedience to Adolf Hitler. You can hear the echo of it from barracks to battlefields. The empire that fell in 1918 is fully resurrected, though it wears a new name, the Third Reich. Historical fact. Every major institution, churches, schools, courts, fell into line. Judges swore allegiance. Teachers taught racial science. Priests offered blessings to rallies. Even artists joined in. Conformity became culture. You visit a classroom in Cologne. On the wall, a map of Europe coloured in bright red, stretching outward like a fever. The teacher taps it with his pointer, These lands were stolen from us in 1919. We will reclaim them. The children repeat the words like prayer. They've never known any other gospel. Scholars still debate whether this transformation was inevitable after 1918. Some argue Germany's humiliation made Nazism unavoidable, that Versailles built the bridge to dictatorship plank by plank. Others insist nothing is inevitable, that every dictatorship is built not from destiny but from consent. You stand among those students and realise both arguments are true in the way tragedies always are. The ghosts of the Great War never left. They simply changed uniforms. The men who once swore vengeance for lost comrades now march again, convinced they're undoing an injustice. The women who wept in breadlines now smile from propaganda posters, holding blonde children under banners that promise eternity. Quirky footnote: one of the first Autobahn projects completed under Hitler was the route from Munich to Salzburg, the same line he had taken years earlier to flee Germany after his failed coup. He literally paved over his own past. The war's legacy, Germany's failure to accept defeat, its hunger for meaning, its myth of betrayal, has finally come full circle. The story that began in the trenches of 1914 has reached its next chapter, and this time, there will be no armistice until the world burns. You find yourself back at a rally in Nuremberg 1935. The stadium is colossal, the architecture monumental, stone and light designed to dwarf the individual. Hitler stands on a raised platform, his voice echoing through microphones that make him sound half human, half machine. Germany, he cries, has risen from the ashes of shame. The crowd answers, Heil, in one rolling wave. You can feel it. The fever that started as pride has become religion. The banners ripple, the searchlights cross in the sky, and the night glows as if the stars themselves are saluting. For a moment, it's almost beautiful. Then you remember what beauty looked like at Verdun, at the Somme, and you know what comes next. By the time the lights fade, the Reich's path is already drawn. Rearmament, expansion, vengeance. The Second World War is germinating quietly in every shouted slogan, every schoolroom map, every factory churning out steel. You close your eyes and hear the faint echo of the first section's warning, back when all of this was still hypothetical. You probably won't survive this. The irony lands softly, none of them did. The First World War didn't end in 1918, it just paused long enough for its children to grow up and reload. And now you've made it. Through mud and gas, treaties and torches, through a story that never really ended. You can set down the history books for a moment, breathe, and remember that this whole century was one long exhale after a scream. Germany lost the First World War not in one battle or one decision, but in 1,000 small choices, each one a refusal to accept loss, each one a seed of something darker. When you think about it tonight, maybe with the fan humming in the background, consider how defeat works. It doesn't arrive all at once, it seeps. It sits quietly in the corners of pride, waiting to be renamed as destiny. For Germany, that renaming turned tragedy into rage, and rage into power. But also remember, every generation gets to decide what it does with its defeats. Some rebuild, some seek revenge. The lesson that cost millions of lives was simple and terrible. That denial can be more dangerous than war itself. You've walked through trenches and treaties, watched myths harden into politics, watched politics turn back into war. It's not a bedtime story that ends neatly. But maybe it's one that ends honestly, with a reminder that no empire, no ideology, no nation, however proud, can outshout the truth forever. Now dim the lights. Let the noise of the last century fade into the distance. The guns are quiet again, for now. Sleep easy knowing that history, like you, always finds a way to start over in the morning.